What's up, my fellow poker enthusiasts? It's Rene, aka the Wacko here, and together with my co-host Adam Carmichael, we present to you the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In this podcast, we deconstruct high-stakes poker players, figuring out what it is about them, how they think, what they do that makes them so successful, with an extra focus on the obstacles they faced and the skills they had to develop to surpass them. Over the years, me and Adam have gained a lot of experience in both reaching high-stakes poker ourselves and teaching other players to do the same. We have bundled all this knowledge together in our coaching program, The Mechanics of Poker, which is the most complete poker coaching product on the market. If you want to have a chance to work with me and Adam so you can get unstuck and make more progress in your poker career, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. But without further ado, let's learn from another high-stakes player's journey in today's episode. Hi there, happy new year everyone. New year, new podcast. I hope this is going to be your greatest poker year ever. And to help with that, we have decided to open up a small number of seats for our Mechanics of Poker program, which you can apply for throughout the first week of January. Okay, so it's only open the first week of January. So if you want to work with me and Adam and make 2023 your best poker year ever, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com, apply, and maybe we will select you to join our program. All right. Now, for today's episodes, we have a live connection with the poker capital of Europe, Vienna, to have a chat with high-stakes poker player and coach George You-Mad-Br0 Froggatt. George has been playing poker for many years, of which the majority he was stuck at 200 NL, but by upgrading his beliefs and surrounding himself with the right people, he managed to work his way up to high-stakes poker, which is the story that he will share with us today. Adam, any beliefs that needed upgrading for you to break through mid-stakes?
Mid-stakes are an interesting period of most players' career where you start making money for the first time. So the main belief that I had to let go of is I have to sacrifice what I've already earned in order to go to that next level. So all of a sudden you have to give up something to gain the next thing. When you're at the lower stakes, it's all about just get to the next level, achieve more. And you haven't really got anything that you could lose, like nothing meaningful anyway. But as you get to mid-stakes, that's where comfort kicks in. That's where you have to break past that feeling of wanting to settle for where you're at. And very often you need someone around you, or at least some sort of, in my circle, I had two friends who were wanting to play higher stakes, who kind of pushed me and nudged me. And I had to let go of my comfort zone, let go of my limitations around what stakes I could play. So I'm really interested to hear George's story, because he was stuck at mid-stakes for quite a while, which often means that there is some sort of limitation that he was creating for himself. We know it's a limitation because he got past it eventually and ended up at the high stakes. So we know it wasn't a long-term thing. So I'm really interested to know what he went through during his mid-stakes grind, and then what changed, what upgrades did he make in his character traits and his approach to poker that allowed him to be a high-stakes player. So very interested in today's guest.
Yeah, I'm very curious as well. I've contacted George already last year, a long time ago, and I've been kind of sending him messages months after, and he finally agreed to come on. So really grateful to have him, especially as the first podcast of this new year. Couldn't have wished for one of the better guests. Before we start, I would like to give a big shout out to our sponsor, GTO Wizard. In my opinion, the best way of studying poker, makes GTO very accessible for everyone. And in my opinion, it's one of the best places to go to if you're serious about your game, okay? Next to having GTO solutions for every spot and having the ability to upload your hands and have Wizard find it for leaks, you get access to weekly coaching webinars in which various coaches, including myself, educate you on the most important spots to start crushing the game. So go over to gtowizard.com/mechanics to get started, and you will get 10% off on your first month. Okay, that's gtowizard/mechanics. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's episode with George You-Mad-Br0 Froggatt. All right, we're here today with George You-Mad-Br0. How are you, George?
Yeah, really good, mate. And happy to be here. Excited to chat.
Yeah, I've stalked you already for a long time. I'm trying to have you on, and here we are finally today. Thank you for coming on. And I wanted to start this pod as it has become a trend amongst the players we have had on, that they've done something competitive pre-poker, usually gaming or sports. In your case, this was swimming, becoming fifth of your country in the youth division. Now, you, I think, pre-podcast said, it's not that big of an achievement. It's not like I went to the Olympics. But I'm always curious, like, what drove you to take swimming serious and try to be competitive in that instead of just jumping in the water slide and having fun in the pool?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, I guess. I think like as far as I can remember, when I was young, at least, not so much now, but when I was young, I was always super competitive in like any sport I did, and I wasn't really very good at many of them. I kind of like always like wanted to do well, and wasn't so good. But swimming is kind of it's kind of a sport where at like low levels, at least, the more you train, the better you are, if that makes sense. Compared to like other sports like football, where like that if you don't have natural talent, you can play and you're never going to be fifth in the country. But yeah, when I was I think that was kind of what drew me to it. I was like quite good already because I swam so much when I was a kid. Like my parents always took me swimming, and then once I started to have success, obviously it became like more appealing because, like I said, I was playing football with my mates all the time, and I was one of the worst of everyone. And it was nice to just have something where I was good at it. And then yeah, I started training more and more. I think at my peak I was training maybe like I was training before school when I was 11 or 12, and then going to school. But I had some problems because I was fifth, I think, when I was 11 years old, maybe. And then I kind of had this 1 year where I didn't grow and everyone else did. And swimming, it's problematic when this happens. Yeah. So all these kids are suddenly like fully grown men, and I was still a kid. And yeah, then I kind of lost the fire a bit when every year I was getting worse and worse and worse. But yeah, I loved it. I still swim nowadays, but like not competitively, just in the pool with my just to keep fit sometimes when I can motivate myself to go.
When was it that you realized, like, okay, swimming is maybe not for me? Did you hit, like, was that when that plateau hit and you were just like, okay, genetically, I guess the rest is now just so ahead of me, it makes no more sense? There was no more, it didn't look fair anymore to you?
Yeah, I think I was always in everything kind of a realist, and I knew I was never going to be in the Olympics or whatever. So once I started kind of slipping down the rankings, so to speak, I kind of joined a smaller club and was swimming less competitively and just treating more as a social thing. When I was maybe like 15 and stuff. And it's so much time commitment as well, because like I said, if you don't put the volume in, you just can't be as good as other people. I think Michael Phelps was saying in a podcast I listened to him, he was saying he was training 3 times a day for like 3 years and didn't miss a single training session, and then every single time he was training hard enough to make himself feel sick. So this is kind of the levels that you get to at the very, very top. So yeah, it was when maybe by the time I was like 30 and I was like swimming in county championships and doing all right, but like not trying as hard anymore. And then gave up completely competitive swimming when I was 15, I guess. But it's also one thing I've realized since as an adult, well, semi-adult, I guess, 29 years old now, guess it counts. It's like the amount of commitment is for your parents as well. Because like my mum and dad both had full-time jobs, and my dad was like waking up before work to drive him to a swimming pool at 6 a.m. And at the time, I was like, oh, I can't be bothered to go swimming. So they're like moaning about it, but like you don't think about for them finishing work and then picking you up. And once I got to kind of 15, I started to realize this a bit more. And I was like, if I'm not going to like give it everything, it's not really fair to put them under, well, for them to expect them to do it and take me to the pool and stuff as well.
That's a very mature thing to realize, I think, at the age of 15. When you then swam non-competitively, the joy was a bit gone, I guess.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the same because it's kind of like poker, which I guess we'll talk about later in similar terms. Like when you're kind of rising the ranks, and you're kind of getting this new feeling of like being better than someone else, like achieving something you never thought you'd achieve. It's just a different feeling to kind of swimming and like coming like third and second in races all the time. But at the same time, as you get older and bigger, you still get faster. So you're still getting like new personal records. They're just relatively not as good. Like I'm pretty sure even now, if I like properly time myself, I'd probably be faster than I ever was when I was competing, just because of the fact that I'm stronger and older, etc. So you do still get that element of improvement, which is nice. And the social side is very, very good as well, because you're all swimming relays, you're on buses, like different events together and stuff. And that was something that I really enjoyed.
I was wondering if you look at poker, do you think poker then is in a way fairer than, is that a word, fairer than swimming is?
Yeah, I mean, I think like poker compared to sports is like fair if we're judging fair by how much effort you put in, how much you get out. Because most sports, especially at elite level, rely so much on natural talent, because you get kind of filled in until you're only against people who had a lot of natural talent. And then once you're at that level, if you don't have that, it's very hard for you to be competing. Whereas poker, there's a lot of like barriers. I just don't think like innate ability is quite as important as in sports, but I guess it's very hard to quantify that. But yeah, I think for sure poker's one of the fairer arenas, at least for now.
Yeah, we usually in our questionnaire, we give you like a statement to choose from. Where do you think talent is necessary, or you think you can achieve anything you can put once you put your effort in? You went for the latter. You chose, if you put your effort, you can make that. I remember actually in the previous podcast with Berkey, he was actually more convinced about talent definitely plays a big role. Obviously, you still need to put in the time, you still need to put in the work. But in the end, in order to really make it, and then we're talking top 1%, he was very convinced that definitely you need some sort of innate abilities. Do you agree with that? Because like obviously the definition of succeeding, I believe anyone can make their money from poker, be a poker professional. But if you're asking me, can anyone play, super high rollers? I'm like, maybe not. So what kind of innate abilities do you think like the top have in terms of talent?
It's such an interesting question, because when you asked me that, I couldn't remember I couldn't have told you what I would have put on the questionnaire, because I think it's like so subjective and close. And it's something we often talk about in our house. We're like, like, do you think if you picked a random person off the street and you gave like your full year of dedication to them, could you teach them to beat like 200 Zoom? And it's just like a random person. And we normally conclude that we think you couldn't, I think is the consensus, because the people you're exposed to in your day-to-day life just aren't the same as a subset of like it's easy to think yes, because you teach them some like population data, some basic lines and so on, that's enough. But the kind of risk aversion side of things, I think is, and this brings back to your question of what do you think is the most important, I think this ability to handle losses is just not something that like a lot of the population can ever build up, maybe. Like I just kept trying to think about the people I interact with in my life that aren't related to poker, and the way they react to adversity generally is like not compatible with being a successful poker player, at least at the very highest stakes. And I think you can improve on that. Obviously, you can improve how you handle things going badly, but human beings aren't very good at it in general, and that some people just have such a baseline that they're never going to get to the ability where they can like sit down in a super high roll and lose for like 4 years in a row and still be there executing well the next year. So yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I guess indeed it's picking a random person off the street is something different than picking a random person who's already playing who's already playing poker in the casino, right? If you get like a low stakes player, that already kind of filters out the people who are not attracted to the game and to begin with. I guess if you take those players, the chance of succeeding are way higher.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it helps as well that I know the rules, because it takes a while for this. But yeah, I think so. But I do think this mental game side and this kind of loss aversion is maybe one of the most important skills, especially from what I've seen. The players I know, they've obviously worked on it a lot, but the players I know who have succeeded at the very highest stakes are very good at this aspect of some of things. And as we'll talk about later, probably it's something I actually struggled with a lot. Like once you start losing such huge amounts of money and having to turn up and execute in a way which makes you a plus EV player day in, day out with that still going on. But yeah, I think in Phil Ivey's interview he did with Joe Ingram, he said something which kind of resonated a bit with me, where he also said when his father passed away, he was kind of numb to it because he'd got so used to suppressing his emotions for so many years. And yeah, we were talking about this in like our house, that we were like, yeah, we could come home and the house is burnt down and we'd be like shrugging, being like, oh well, like nothing we can do about it now, may as well just move on and not be tilted about it and stuff like this, which is obviously very, very good for poker. But in life, it definitely, like Phil was saying, causes some problems as well. And then it just becomes really hard basically balancing these two sides of things, I think. So it's not necessarily like, it can sound condescending to be like, oh yeah, people can't handle the risk aversion, they'll never succeed at high stakes because of it for the average person. But it's not necessarily a skill you want in the rest of your life, to be completely numb to what's going on in the world around you.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because exactly when you said that, the house burns down, or when adversity happens, I usually take a lot of pride in how I can handle it, right? It's like, yeah, shit happens, variance, move on, out of our control. But indeed, like, there's another side as well. And that's kind of the side where I'm now, where I'm trying to allow a bit more the emotion, actually feel sad about it. Like, hey man, my house burned down. Shit, there was a lot of things that you understand? To at least have a certain window to kind of grieve, I guess, in that situation, to be sad about it. But then I guess the difference is how you then further respond to that situation, how out of control you're going to get. People freak out, or people stay within that emotion for way too long. I guess, being sad about it for, at least a couple of hours is totally human. And I think a lot of players that listen to this who have a relationship can definitely relate to this.
Yeah, 100%.
The amount of times that my wife went to me like, hello, can I have some emotion, please? But yeah, I mean, if you just got home out of a whole 8 hours of grinding where you're trying to suppress your emotions and not go with the ups and downs, yeah, it's very hard to suddenly be a loving, openly warm, emotional guy at home, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And at least then I still try to a certain degree, whereas you say you live with other poker players, which basically that keeps you in that mode 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and like you said, with relationships is sometimes the hardest thing. And yeah, I think it's just something in general in poker, like I've talked about a lot recently. It's like people kind of forget that you want to become very good at poker, and this is like admirable and something which I've spent a lot of my life doing, obviously. But you don't want to forget, like, there's no point, like, the end goal isn't to be the best at poker and terrible at everything else in life. So, like, yeah, managing the kind of crossovers is very difficult, and like balancing it for sure is hard. And this loss aversion is maybe the hardest part, I think, because it's like the thing that humans are the worst at, and maybe what makes people good at poker is your ability to like call and lose and be happy about it constantly. So you work super hard on suppressing this kind of reaction to results, and then like we're talking about in real life, this doesn't make you a kind of nice person to be around sometimes. So yeah, it's an interesting balancing act.
I've been called out for my lack of empathy when my wife says something that's bad. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. She always makes fun. She says, I'm sorry to hear that. Nowadays, when I say something, she says, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But like in a very sarcastic way,
Yeah.
Like, what do you want me to say? I'm sorry to hear that. Right?
Yeah. It's good from her. At least he gets back at you for it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was wondering that throughout swimming, did you learn any lessons or develop certain skills that you think were helpful at the start of your poker career?
I think like the one thing which I always, until very recently, I thought I was very good at is the fact that swimming, it kind of is about pushing through pain levels, basically, like pushing through pain thresholds, and always that you have more in the tank than you believe you have, and like you realize that you can go harder than you thought you could and achieve like more than you thought you could through the pain barrier, because so much of it is kind of hitting that I think it's called the lactate threshold or whatever, where like your muscles are completely burning, and then keeping going, like not breathing, because breathing and swimming in sprints is very bad. Like if you breathe, you lose time. So like you think you run out of oxygen, but you can keep your head under the water and try as hard as you can for another 10 meters till you get to the end, and like this, I think is very good just for kind of self-belief, because you achieve something you didn't think you could, and then you start to believe that you can achieve other things that you didn't think you could. But I would say one thing, like I think I even posted about on Twitter recently, one thing I don't like the idea of thinking there wasn't any light bulb moment. I wasn't like swimming one day and I was like, wow, like this makes me realize I can believe in myself. It's more like a kind of holistic thing, that pushing myself more in my youth in these things, which obviously I have my parents to be thankful for, probably gave me more self-belief than if I hadn't done competitive sport in my youth, because like, yeah, you just get used to this idea that you're going to achieve stuff that you didn't think you could, and you can go further than you think you can. So yeah, no individual moment.
Yeah, but I guess indeed, like that experience, that once you put a lot of time into something, that you can actually grow in something. Kind of the growth mindset, right? Oh, in the beginning, I might, I sucked at swimming, but I put it more time. I was consistent, and therefore I progressed. And then I guess you took that mindset and saw poker as something like, hey, well, if I do the same thing as I did in swimming, then I guess it will progress. Whereas other players are more, they sit down, you know, they didn't play well. They're like, well, I guess I suck at this game, right? It's a different type of mindset.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And I think, yeah, just have to be, it's definitely a lot of luck with upbringing, because like, yeah, my parents were like always encouraging me to do sports, etc. And it's not like I had much choice in the matter myself, but obviously, like you said, I think it's definitely contributes a lot to how you perceive yourself as like a younger adult and the decisions you make as a result of that.
You mentioned that you grew up in a relatively poor neighborhood in the UK, and due to that, you were always thinking of different ways that you could make money in the future, especially, I guess, alternative ways, right? You ended up playing poker. In the end, you decided on poker, and I'm curious to hear why that was. But first, I'm curious what other ways of making money you thought of, or maybe even tried.
Yeah. I think like I would qualify poor with like, yeah, like poor. We never had a huge amount of money. My parents were very, very good at managing the money, so I never really felt super poor. As only as I kind of grew older, I realized that the area I'm from wasn't like once I started to see the rest of the world, I realized it wasn't such a like affluent area. Like compare stories about school and stuff to other people. But yeah, it was always kind of not like starving on the streets or anything at any point.
Yeah, we're talking relatively poor standards in the UK, right? We're not talking about.
Yeah, I just think compared to, I think I was listening to other stories on the podcast, and I was like, yeah, it's not quite the same, but yeah, I was always like very driven to kind of make money. My parents also never gave me any money at all, and I think that contributed it too. So I always had a paper round from like a very young age, where I was like going before school, the days I wasn't swimming, delivering papers, and sometimes not delivering the papers and hiding them in bins and stuff like this, but getting some money for this. And then the other scheme I had is I used to buy moldy packs of Coca-Cola bottles and sell them in school, because there was a big thing in the UK where some guy, they used to sell Coca-Cola in the school, in the canteens, and then a guy made like a health campaign where he said, you can't do this anymore. And this was obviously a big opportunity for entrepreneurs like myself to go and supply the Coca-Cola cans to everyone. So I used to buy them before school and then resell them at like markup. And it was actually a lot of money. I was making like £5 a day when I was 12, which is a lot. But I got put out of business because someone else in my school decided he could just steal the Coca-Cola cans from the shop instead of buying them. And then he was undercutting me, like selling them like half the price. But yeah, it was good for a while. But then, yeah, crime was paying off too much for the other guy, and I didn't want to get into the shoplifting business. So.
Smart career choice. Let's try to keep it on the legal path. So how did you then, in the end, you know, after your Coca-Cola business, how in the end did you get in touch with poker, and why did you then think that, like, hey, this is something that is a good opportunity to make money?
Yeah, so we were playing like when I was like 15, I guess. We started playing home games after school. Like some people got into it, and then we were playing. I actually didn't get into it. Like they were playing the games, and I finally came along after a while. And the first game we played, I literally lost 100% of hands. I remember this. I like bust and rebought, and didn't win any hands at all. And these games, they were bizarre. Like we were playing these like £5 sitting goes, which is very big stakes for a 15-year-old. Like the winning player would get like £100. And like there was one card which was marked, for example, and everyone knew it was marked. So like the king of clubs, everyone knew when they had it. And yeah, but like then when new players came, we just thought it was fine. Like no, we didn't tell them, so it was like ethically dubious. But when like new player comes, he's like obviously the worst, and he also doesn't know that everyone knows he has the king of clubs. And then there was all kinds of mad stuff that went on. I remember one time we found on the floor, we were like in a sit and go. It started with 10 players, was down to the last 3. And we found a card on the floor, and we were like, what do we do now? We had to like call the floor over to make a ruling, but the floor was just the most popular kid in the game. And he said, but like this card's on the floor, so the whole game's void, because the whole thing would have been different, you know? So that it was down to the last 3 players, and we just chopped the whole pot amongst everyone, including the guys who'd all bust already. But yeah, I started playing these games, and it went badly at first, and then I started to like decide I didn't want to lose money, and also you could make a lot of money. So and my opponents, they weren't particularly strong, I would say. So
but that's something that you did realize there was a certain strategic aspect to it, because I guess, you know, most people would just be like, yeah, okay, it's about whoever gets good cards. I lost all my money. This game sucks. But you were like, interesting. I lost a lot, but I guess I have some sort of influence. How and these guys seem bad, but in order to judge that they are bad, you must first gain some sort of knowledge, I assume.
Yeah, I think I was already on like 2+2, and deuce was cracked like pretty early because I was getting so tilted about losing the money. And if you bust first, you had to go buy fish and chips from the shop for everyone else as well and stuff like this. So like there was big incentives to get better. And yeah, so I started on 2+2, and I started to realize like that there was another thing. I actually specifically remember, maybe I even posted this, or someone else posted it on 2+2 when I was reading it. We used to think when the board had 2-pair on it, so it was like queen, queen, jack, jack, black. Blank. Like we thought ace was the nuts because someone learned that we learned that like ace kicker plays on 2-pair boards, and so like it would get to the river and it would be like raise, re-raise, re-raise, and someone would be like, yeah, I've got the ace, like slam it down the table, and the other guy would be like, oh man, I've got the king, for God's sake, like lost my stack again. And I read a hand that was like this, and like someone had a boat, and then the 2+2 thread was like, you should fold. Like someone had the jack, and it was like 4-bet on the river. And someone said fold, and I was like, this was a light bulb moment for me. I was like, hang on, like maybe we've got these thresholds like incorrect in these games. So yeah, and after that I started to like learn pre-flop ranges and stuff, and that was enough to like do really well. And then randomly started playing online on an account in my dad's name and went from there.
Okay, now I was not going to mention anything because you mentioned 70 years old. That was like, probably a little bit below the league weight. So it gave you an extra year of advantage over the rest. So you then played throughout university, if I understood correctly. Next to your university, you were playing poker. You mentioned that this helped you in your mental game afterwards, once you had your university degree. What do you mean with that? How does it help you with your mental game?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm definitely on the nittier side in general. Like I attribute some of it to my background, maybe just some of it to how I've always been like a lot more kind of like scared of going broke, basically. Because I just always want the freedom to kind of choose to do what I do. And having the degree and like finishing it, it was like from a reasonably good university in the UK and a reasonably good subject. At least it just helped me to have a lot more comfortable. Like when poker was going badly, I was like, well, I'm like studying as well, you know, like I'm gonna end up with something where I can get a career if I need to from off the back of it. So yeah, I never really thought about not finishing my degree. I always thought it was like important to me.
Yeah, because you mentioned that throughout your university, you know, you're making like 50, 80K a year. That's quite a lot of money. Like a lot of people, me included, would be like, hey, this sounds good. This is what I'm going to do. Like I can take with this job, but it's not going to pay the same. Or, you know, and I enjoy this way more. I'm sitting by my computer playing a game of cards. How did you stay sane?
I think I was like, a lot of it is luck, obviously. Like, luck, you could say luck or bad luck. Maybe it would have gone better for me if I had dropped out. But I was like very early on, like with Pio, like I must have been one of the earliest people to use it. And given that, I should have maybe done better, but I was lost in a lot of bad rabbit holes. But anyway, once this came out, and I was obviously studying a lot of game theory in university as well, I was like quite convinced that poker was in its death throes. I didn't really understand the game well enough to realize that it wouldn't die. So for this reason, I was like, yeah, like I'm not going to push it at higher stakes. I'm just going to bank the money I can make now, and then like obviously, then I'll just kind of leave with my winnings, and because I think that now the Piosolver, and it was even when I remember when Poker Snowy came out, I was like, right, this is it. Then I guess they did backgammon. Now they're doing now it's game over for poker as well. So yeah, like this was a lot of what made me finish my degree. I was like, poker's not going to be around, so I need to have some kind of backup. And obviously, knowing what I know now, I've realized how flawed my thinking was. Like, because obviously I know now that playing like Pio isn't the best way to win money. But back then I thought it was just a case that everyone's going to be replicating Pio perfectly. Bots are going to be replicating Pio perfectly. No one's going to win.
Interesting. We will get back to that thought. I wanted to now first hand it over to Adam. Adam, you have shared your story of packing your bags, going to Thailand, having 3 months of budget and trying to make it as a poker player. When you did that, did you have some sort of safety net or a certain degree that you could fall back on, and did that help you take that risk?
Well, I just graduated from university. I say just, it was a year previously. I was bumming around my parents' house, working a part-time job. And to be honest, my prospects weren't looking great. I had a degree in sports science, which good on paper, but as I was trying to find jobs, there was just kind of nothing around, or they were too competitive, and every time a job came available, there was 80 applications, and getting an interview was hard enough. So I ended up just falling into like really easy jobs. So when I decided to play poker, it was either make this work or come back to my parents' house and figure out the next move, which would have been something very unambitious. So yeah, in terms of having the degree, I definitely didn't feel it as it was going to help me or that it was going to guide me through. It did give me a little bit of kind of confidence in myself that I could finish things. I think university, and one of the reasons it kind of helps you get jobs, is it shows to the employer that you can stick at something for 3+ years and commit yourself to something. So even getting through the degree, I could tell myself, oh yeah, I've got some sort of sticking power to kind of learn and get better. So that allowed me to go into poker with like, okay, I'm not an idiot. I should be able to pick this up. Some people might quit at this. I've got a bit of resilience to keep going, even though it gets tough. So that was kind of the main kind of fallback. But yeah, once you get into poker, you kind of realize, oh, it's kind of make or break. You've got to find your own path. And once you start with poker, I feel like everything else seems very unappealing. I'm really curious to know how you were able to play poker through university when you're making like 50 to 80K. So if I remember my university career, basically I'm showing up to lectures most days of the week, and no one really cares if I show up. There's certain lectures that I can miss if I want to. Exams come around and coursework comes around, and basically you're a self-learner, a self-directed learner who's got to find a way to study, find a way to put coursework in, and show up for exams. You've got the option to go on your computer and make, let's go with 5 to 10K a month playing poker. How the hell did you manage to, one, show up at university, and two, not fail your exams?
Yeah, it's like I actually didn't go to any lectures from my first year onwards, I'll be honest with you, where I definitely have this problem a bit. I will say that I think my best year was like 70K, if I recall correctly, in uni, and it was like variance around there, like kind of 40 to that amount, if I recall correctly. But I basically like you said, university I think for me was very, very hard actually, and even now I still have like dreams sometimes where I wake up and I'm like, I've got my exams coming up, I haven't learned anything yet, and like I know I've got to do them. It's like it's actual PTSD I think from this. But yeah, basically my tactic was, because my course was economics and there was no coursework, it was all exams. Actually, there was one piece of coursework, and I literally remember I received an email where the lecturer was like, "Oh yeah, the coursework deadline's been extended by 1 week, and it was supposed to be in tomorrow, and now you got 1 week." And I didn't even know that we had any coursework at all. So when I got the email, I was like, "Thank God for that unbelievable sun run." But yeah, the way it works is we had 6 hours of exam, sorry, 6 3-hour exams, so 18 hours of exams in total every year at the end of the year. And the way I would do it is I would self-ban from all the poker websites a month before this, and then go to the library and take some study drugs or whatever, and just literally just be in the library the whole time, like learning the course. And also the exams, I did the same for my A-levels as well. I didn't go to school through the second year of A-levels at least, and was doing the same thing. And all the exams in England, I mean, I'm assuming it's similar to you, they're kind of gameable, where they give you an option to be like, answer like one of these 3 questions, and you can like, obviously what people learn the whole module because they think they're in university to learn, which is obviously the correct way to go about it. But I was like, I've got limited time, I've got 1 month, so the first thing I'm going to do is write down like all the options that can come up and work out how much of it I can just not learn at all, and then go from there. And there were definitely some exams I went into, like last year was so insane, like I didn't have time at all. There were some exams I went into where I had like a 5% chance that I'd open the paper and I wouldn't actually know like anything at all. So it was like the biggest sweat. I'd like walk into the exam, flip open the paper, and there was so much relief when I was like, what one of these questions I can actually answer. But yeah, it was not like I was kind of in university for like 2 months of the year, every year in winter and in summer, and like my girlfriend at the time was like bringing me meals in the library. I was like waking up at 7 a.m. taking one of these modafinil pills, and then like going to the library at 8 a.m. leaving at 10 p.m. So it wasn't a great way to live, and it's probably no wonder that I still have like some stress from it, but it worked out okay in the end.
The university crash course, yeah, I can relate to that. I had lots of periods of the year where I was just completely cruising. I did go to lectures like most weeks, and I had coursework throughout the year, but like you said, like those exam periods are just like really intense. It's like 2 weeks to a month of, I think it's study leave. I remember it's study leave. Maybe I did, maybe I skipped this. And you really just live in the library, just non-stop, just studying the material. And like you said, you haven't got time to learn a year's worth of textbooks and materials, so you've got to kind of hedge your bets. I love how you said the exams are gameable. Only a poker player could ever try to gamify the exam system. But yeah, you find out basically like going through old exam papers. I used to get all the old papers. And questions are coming up over and over. And yeah, like sometimes you go into an exam and you're like, okay, I know about 20% of the course material here. I'm hedging my bets that this is definitely going to come up, and you're flicking through going, multiple choice, yes, there it is. Like, I know this one. And other times I can picture being exams going, I do not even know what the question means. I got no research to back this up. I'm just going to start writing. This is definitely a retake because I'm feeling this one. So yeah, I can relate to that very, very strongly. You mentioned, I just want to circle back before we continue the story. You mentioned that you got good at pushing through the pain during swimming, but you said until recently. So something must have happened sometime recently that made you question whether you're still good at pushing through the pain. So could you tell me what happens to feel like you're not as good at pushing the pain?
Yeah. It's more of a trivial thing, really, but it's a funny story anyway. Me and my housemates, we started going to hot yoga firstly, and that was like, all right, it was pretty hard. It's like yoga but in a room that's heated to 40 degrees. And then we saw there was a class called Inferno Hot Pilates, all right? And we were like, this sounds interesting. What can this be? Because I've done Pilates when I was a kid, and it's not really like, the words inferno and hot don't really go with Pilates because it's like chilled, like stretching class. So my housemate went once and he was like, yeah, you've got to come to this, mate. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. So I went to it, and like me and Daryl also came along, and a couple of girls we know. And it's like nothing I've ever done before. It's like 40-degree room, but everyone's like packed together side by side. It's such a popular class, and it's HIIT training. So you're like constantly like doing like no rest for an hour in between these workouts, and your heart, I can't breathe after like 30 minutes. My heart rate's going. And what I mean is that like I always thought in sport that I was very, very good like at pushing through thresholds, because I was doing a lot of long distance running, like at 5Ks and stuff like this. And the same with swimming. But then when I'm in this class, there's just times where I just can't carry on. I look over to my right, and there'll be like a girl who's like got a lot less muscles, it would appear, at least than I do, and she'll just be like absolutely smashing through the exercise, like not even struggling at all, and like just like breathing perfectly. And then there'll be other guys who are like completely dead, but they're just still doing it, whilst I'm on the floor and like a corpse in a heat. So yeah, it just made me realize there's always like other levels, obviously, that you can go to, and obviously would quite like to get to those levels. Not sure if I will, but yeah, more of a funny story. Anything else?
Yeah, I can relate to like that being very tough. I do a lot of saunas at the moment. I kind of push myself to kind of the failure point. I'm not throwing weights around, not doing anything high intensity in there. But yeah, I think your heat tolerance is very trainable, and there's a lot of variance amongst people's heat tolerance. So like the girl next to you who's smashing through the workout, she's probably got a higher threshold for like getting to high temperatures and not, I won't say the brain overheats at certain temperatures, and there's gonna be like a shutdown effect in the body where you can't push through it. So yeah, maybe you're just not adapted to the heat. I'm trying to give you an escape card here.
Yeah, I'll take it.
The mental toughness is there. It was just the heat that was the limiting factor. But yeah, there's certain things like I feel like my tolerance for pain, because I did middle distance running like for 10 years, my tolerance for pain is really good when I couldn't push in the body. But sometimes you put me out my environment of what I'm used to pushing in. I'm like, oh, these thresholds are not what I'm used to, and I feel like I can't push as much as I want to. So yeah, I think even mental toughness, resilience, you need a degree of like confidence in your ability to push through that pain. If you're used to the pain, like it's swimming, or for me it was running, if I'm used to like what the pain thresholds feel like, I know where I am, and I know where to push through those. If it's a complete anomaly, let's say you throw you in a frozen lake, you haven't adapted to cold before, all of a sudden you're like, oh, am I going to die? Is this too much? So yeah, even then different environments, you can struggle to push yourself as much.
Yeah, I know you could obviously bring this back to poker as well, right? Like it's like if I play tournaments, like I hope I'm like plus EV in like a random 5K WQ main, but it's much more stressful because I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like compared to like the games you play day in, day out. So yeah, I think it's definite analogies, and I definitely agree with you as well.
So when university was over for you, did you decide to go straight into poker full time, or what were your options at that moment? So you've just managed to somehow juggle poker and get a degree. You've ticked that degree box, and now your kind of career paths are opening up in terms of going into professional jobs, or poker has been going really well. How did you go for that phase, and what was the kind of options that you chose?
Yeah, I think like I always had this plan to go traveling after university, because I hadn't ever been outside Europe before. So, well, actually I've been to New Zealand once, but whilst I was in university, but I was planning to travel for a year basically all along. But then at this point I was skiing competitively, like in England, which is very low standard for anyone who skis. So I was doing like freestyle skiing, but like it was like I was good for English standards, very bad by international standards. And yeah, I was like throwing my body around, like doing these flips and spins and stuff. And then eventually, obviously, I got injured. So I snapped my ACL, LCL, all three of my knee ligaments. And this was just before my final exams in university. And basically meant I couldn't travel for the year, because a lot of the reason I wanted to travel was to ski in Canada and stuff. So I had a year after university was just kind of dead time where I decided, well, obviously I may as well play poker. Makes sense. But at the same time, I wasn't playing that seriously. I was like playing, but not like, I was playing a lot of hours, but I wouldn't say I was treating it professionally like I do now. I'm mostly just saving up money to travel with my then girlfriend after this year was over. So yeah, the whole goal for that year was like play poker so I can travel the world for a year afterwards. And then after that, it will be job o'clock, was always the kind of plan for the whole time, yeah.
So even at this phase, you're not really seeing poker as your long-term career. Even though you had success for university, it's still almost like a side thing. Keep you going, make some money.
Yeah.
Your eyes are mainly fixed on traveling, even at this phase.
100%, yeah. And I think like, honestly, never, at no point really did I think that I was going to play poker like as my main job at this age when I was like 22, 23. And I even remember when I went to Canada and I was like in the ski season and I was like still playing poker to make cash. Like all the guys I was living with were like working part-time jobs in pizza shops and stuff like that. And they obviously talked about my plans, my very good friends at the time. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go and get a job in like strategy consulting or something afterwards. And they were all like, we all think you're mad, by the way, because like you've got this like, you're doing this, you're like living the dream, and like, why would you want to like give that up and go back and get a job when you have the choice to carry on living the dream? But even when they said this, I was like, yeah, well, this is my plan, you know. I don't know why, I just never really like, I think it's because I was so convinced that the game wasn't going to be around. Even though there was like a lot of evidence to the contrary, like I was in Skype groups with Lions who's playing 200 Zoom and I was playing 200 Zoom, and then like 6 months later, he's like playing OTP heads up and stuff like this. And I should have surely seen this and like adjusted, but I was so anchored to this idea that the game was like kind of going to be done at that age that it probably cost me a lot. But then, yeah, I think it goes both ways. Like a lot of good things happened as a result of it as well. So, but yeah, definitely didn't really believe that I could play properly in the long term at that stage.
Yeah. So this phase, you're seeing poker as like a very short-term thing. You think the games are going to die and they're not going to be around for very long. You think it was the writing's on the wall and it's pointless kind of put much energy into this long-term pursuit because it's going to be closed off. In terms of how you're approaching poker this time, did that not create some urgency to try and kind of capitalize on the games whilst they were there? I picture myself in conversations back in 2014, 2015, like, all right, this is the last good year of poker. Let's really smash it. And I'm so sure every poker player has had this conversation with friends. And that for me created a lot of urgency. I was like, right, max volume, play enough because next year is probably going to be gone. Did it drive you to want to play more, or did you more like approach it a bit more lighthearted?
Yeah, I always played quite a lot of volume. I think even now, I think I play a lot more volume than like most people at my stakes. But yeah, back then I was playing a lot, but I wasn't really like pushing myself to move up the stakes. I think this was the thing, and I was also doing a lot of coaching. Like I feel like my win rate was quite high. I had like quite good strategies. I think looking back, but I watched a video recently myself, and I was surprised by like I thought I'd be playing awfully, but like I wasn't that bad. But yeah, I was just playing loads of volume at 200 NL basically, and not really pushed, like playing a bit of 500, and not really ever considering even playing higher, because I thought like I also had this attitude which held me back a lot, where I thought that people, even despite being in the group I was, where like a lot of my group were already having like this insane success at high stakes, where I kind of thought because poker is such like an open market where anyone in the world can sit down and play and have the opportunity to make millions, I was like, they must be really, really good. Like all along, I was like, if you can sit at this 1K table, for example, and make 200, 300K a year, like the players who are there, they must just be good, because if everyone has this opportunity, like kind of natural selection should mean that the ones who are doing it are really, really good. And like I still think this is true, and you have to respect the games you play, because like is a true meritocracy in the EU markets, like anyone can come and play. But obviously it's like I think I underestimated myself a bit. Basically, I was probably like quite good as well as them. And obviously, like we all know, people, even the guys who are very, very good, like I still think to beat 1K now, you are like very good, relatively speaking. They still make a lot of mistakes in terms compared to like optimal play or like elite play. So yeah, that held me back a lot, this belief that everyone was a lot better than they were, for sure. I even remember I Skype messaged Linus, actually. We didn't speak much because I thought Linus was very bad as well when he was in the Skype group with me.
Bang.
Yeah, but like it was obviously I was like awful myself, and he'd post these hands where he's playing so aggressively, and I'd be like, come on mate, you're so out of line. And like then obviously he stopped posting the Skype group for obvious reasons. It was like a 200 Zoom group. I think Big Blind Bets was in there as well, and I had a big argument with him, telling him that his play was bad. But yeah, I was like obviously anchored in my own beliefs, and they were wrong. But I even remember messaging him being like, yo, mate, it's so sick that you're playing these heads-up matches, but watch out, like, obviously OTP, he's like supposed to be good. And like, he was like, yeah, man, I'm absolutely loving it. I don't even care if I lose. I just like love playing every day against him. And yeah, it's just completely different mindset. And like, yeah, I didn't know at all how bad I was at this stage. Well, I obviously did, because I didn't push myself to play higher. So it was a double-edged sword where I was like, yeah, like everyone above me must be really good. Also, like, I must know better than like the other people who actually know in real life. And yeah, it was bad mental game stuff, I think, looking back.
But it sounds like it's got a lot of stuff going on there, where one, you're kind of limiting yourself from going higher. One, because you think the games aren't going to be good for long enough, and also because you're kind of putting everyone on a pedestal, and you're thinking that they're very, very good relatively, or they must have some sort of amazing skill level to get to the level they're at. So you're almost like playing things safe a little bit, and you're almost like trying to hold the people back as well, going, right, look, you guys don't play on TV. So trying to put your beliefs onto them, sort of thing. But at the same time, obviously, you're playing a lot. You're probably not doing yourself a disservice by saying that you were a rubbish player, because obviously it's relative to the games at those times. Obviously, I think everyone looked back 6-7 years ago, they could find a lot of really bad player.
Yeah.
You did a good win rate, you were doing lots of coaching, you probably had the skill level to progress further if you wanted to at that stage. But obviously you said you were limiting yourself and holding yourself back. So this led you to like, play poker, say, not all out, and go traveling. So talk us through what you learned about yourself going traveling. Where did you explore? What was the kind of, why did you feel like you wanted to put poker on hold and go traveling? Or did you manage to grind as you were traveling?
Yeah, I think like for me, it was always like very important to like see travel. Cause I think I was always like had this kind of, and I read a lot when I was a kid, and I always had this kind of image, which I still believe, I guess, where it's like a lot of life is like how much enjoyment you get basically, and like the more experiences and like the more you see, the more like fun things you do, like the better your life is. So I was like, want to make sure my life has a lot of fun things in there. So yeah, like when I was in university, I did a ski season in New Zealand in the summer and stuff like this, and was like supposedly playing poker there, but not so much. I think I was doing a coaching for Profits of Ishtar 1-1 at the time. I was coaching him as like my main source of poker. But yeah, anyway, after university, I was traveling. I did a ski season in Canada, which was really, really good. Absolutely loved it, in Whistler. And then after that, we went to, before we were in the United States, like traveling around California, doing some climbing, hiking, etc. And then went to through Asia afterwards, which, yeah, it's tough to say I really learned much. Like, I think I definitely saw like a lot of cultures, which I just had absolutely no idea about. You also see like how far the extremes go in the world, you know, from like San Francisco. Like I was actually coaching a guy who worked at Google. He was a live recreational player, and he invited us to the offices at Google in San Francisco, me and my girlfriend at the time, when we were there. And that was like obviously insane, like the facilities they have there, like hairdresser and living in, like cinema in the offices and stuff, like all this free stuff. And then going to Cambodia afterwards, obviously, which is the other end of the spectrum, and seeing like and visiting like the war museums there, and like seeing how like polar the world is. I think that's the biggest thing I learned, I guess. Like yeah. And also just kind of the belief, like, again, that like you can go to all these places and like look after yourself, you know, and go on all these adventures, like do all these like hikes and climbs and stuff like this, and not die, but some survivor bias maybe there as well.
Yeah, I think traveling gives you like a broader perspective of life and the human experience overall. We often live in our own bubbles, and the people around us are somewhat similar. Obviously, there's differences. Once you go like across the world to Asia or to South America, and you see like kind of the poverty divide, but you also see the different nature and culture of people. It just makes you realize, oh, wait a second, like there's so much variety of people in the world. And often the problem, what I generally realize when I go to the kind of less well-off places, is I realize how fortunate I am to live the life I have, and like all the opportunities that I had were really by luck, by being born in the UK, the right age. And I look around and go, wow, these people like really don't have much of a chance to progress from their situation. Yes, obviously there's definitely an opportunity to do something, but their hands are sort of tied. But at the same time, I always find in Asia, I live in Bali right now, some of like the poorest people I meet are the happiest people. Like they're so happy, like the rice field workers, the people who work in my local shop who like make like very minimum wage, smiling, happy. They'll give you the shit off their back if you wanted it. And yeah, it gives you this kind of perspective where you're like, wait a second, I'm chasing all this money achievement stuff, and these guys seem to be super happy with nothing. Maybe I'm missing something here. Is there something like more to life? So yeah, I think it gives you a clear perspective, but also a wider lens of what it's like to be human. And yeah, it's a worth doing for anyone. I think anyone who could travel if they get an opportunity should spend some time traveling.
Yeah, 100% agree. And it's just this general idea is something I thought a lot about in my life as well. Like, yeah, like obviously firstly, like the fact that we're here now playing, like I think there's like a lot of so much of it is attributable to luck. Like for me, it's like the people I met. Like even the fact that when I first started playing poker online, I was probably getting very lucky. You know, like I think most people who keep playing, like when you start playing, you're a fish, and like if you run bad, like if you're a fish and you run bad, it's just not fun. You just get so destroyed. You probably never log on to the client again. Whereas like I was like winning tournaments when I was like obviously literally a losing player. So definitely some attribute to like being around just still luck. And then the second half, what you said as well, just this idea like experience is so subjective, and like you can like achieve all your goals, but if you keep like pushing to be like in richer circles or whatever, you're always gonna feel subjectively poor and like, not happy. And then yeah, like you said, you can see these families that have what we would consider nothing, but like they're much happier, and like who's the real winner at the end of the day in this game, if that's the way to think about it. Yeah.
It makes you a deep reflection, isn't it? When you're thinking, you go, wow, like they're happier than me. And by my standards, they've got like nothing. And I'm like, how have you done that? Like, who's winning here? Like, it's funny kind of a thought exercise to do. Who's winning the game of life here? And you assume nobody, because like some form of achievement, at least, or something that you can lie on. So yeah, it's very interesting to see that. And I think it's, as a human, it's really good to have wide, like you've been talking about, lots of experiences to first get to know yourself, what you like, what you enjoy, but also to, just get a bigger perspective of life and what happiness looks like, what the whole journey of life that we're all trying to wing along, and what it's all about. So yeah, very interesting. All right, cool. So I want to take the story to when you got back from traveling, and around this time, this is when you said you decided to go full-time and really start your professional career. So first question is, what changed that made you think now I can go professional? I think it's around 2018 by now. What changed? Why did you feel like this was the moment that you could actually pursue it, when previously you were thinking it wasn't going to be a long-term option?
Yeah, so there was actually one gap between us. So when I actually got back from traveling, I was still in the job mode, right? And I applied to a few jobs and got like, at the time, what was like quite a promising job. It was like consulting with a big firm. And I actually did this for 8 months. So I actually went to work there for 8 months. And then it was like, when I was working there, I was like, mate, maybe I was wrong all along, and like like corporate life is not what I wanted after all. And then it was kind of like the first couple of months are absolutely amazing, and I was like learning so much, and like really enjoyed it. Like social life was so good as well through this company, and like the salary was all right, it was nothing compared to poker, but like for normal jobs in quotation marks, good. But then it was kind of the fact that like I realized firstly that I was like good at this consulting, I think, relatively, but nowhere near as good as I was at poker. So I realized like all these years I put into like getting good at poker are like worth something. Like I was kind of like let's say top 1,000 in the world would be like a comfortable way to say at cash at that point. And at consulting, I was probably like top 2 million or something. And I was like, so that's worth something. And then also it was really frustrating, like the corporate nonsense basically, and like the lack of like in poker, if you think you're better, you go and sit with someone, and like if you're better, you on the long term at least supposedly win. In consulting, it's like if you think you're better, you like grind for like 3 years, you like make sure you're friends with all the right people, make sure you try and do the right thing, and then maybe you might get promoted, and then you'll probably still be at that point actually technically good enough to do the next role above, and you've got to start the whole process again. And it's very frustrating, like the lack of meritocracy. Like it's more about like what you do and who you know than how well you do it in a lot of the consulting world.
So you sampled the corporate life and you realized wasn't quite a fit for you. Like you said, the first few months very exciting. Then you got into all the politics and the leveling up through connections, and you could say basically it wasn't what you envisioned, at least when you're at university and going down a career path. So then you've got the option, okay, do I keep pursuing this, or do I quit this job and go poker professionally? How were you weighing up this choice point? Did you give yourself a kind of time frame to make the decision? Did you quit your job and go to poker? Talk to us about this transition from the full-time job to starting poker.
Yeah, I think I remember it quite well, actually. I went to visit, I spoke a bit to my parents, and then I went to visit Donald D7, for anyone who doesn't know him, was like mid-stage cash grinder, well, high-stage cash grinder back then, and founded BitB originally. And I went to speak to him in Edinburgh because I was living in Newcastle, like traveling between Newcastle and London. And we had a chat, and we were like, oh yeah, like I was like, what if I did come back, like what could we do together with like this BitB business he'd started, which was at the time it was a group of staking a few cash in players, coaching a few cash in players for profit. I was like, yeah, could we like expand this? Would you like be prepared to give me a piece of the business? Like these are the stuff I think I can bring to it, because I have learned something in consulting, less now than I thought, I guess, but at the time I was convinced that I'd learned a lot there. And I was like, yeah, can we like make some kind of deal here? And I'll be like all in if I give up, because I'll be giving up this like corporate career, you know, now. And it's not like I want you playing poker, I was in the past. And he was like super keen for it. He was like, yeah, we were both like really hyped to get started. And also I had such a drive because I was giving up. I was playing poker whilst I was consulting still and making like the same amount of money. Well, that's not quite true, but similar amounts, playing like 1 hour, 200 Zoom a day, running very, very well as it turned out. But yeah, like I just had much more fire then, because I'd also just ended a relationship. My ex-girlfriend, she wasn't so keen on poker, and I was like suddenly like really had the fire to be like, yeah, if I'm quitting this consulting job, I'm gonna like go all in on poker. And there was some interactions in the consulting job as well. I was like, this is the line, mate. I'm just quitting. I think I went to see Donald one weekend in Edinburgh, and then on the Sunday I left Edinburgh, came back to Newcastle, and I handed in my notice that Monday. So it was like a fairly quick decision once I decided to do it, because yeah, I was just done with showing up to this office, honestly.
It sounds like a quick final decision, but the kind of stars were aligning for a period of time. And yeah, I felt like everything that was in your way of pursuing poker more full time kind of moved out of the way. The girlfriend who wasn't supportive, even now a friend who's really passionate about it, who's got ideas. The career job itself isn't as glamorous as you wanted it to be. So everything's like kind of pushing you towards playing poker now. All right, so now we're starting your full-time career, and we're a professional career, we'll call it. And you said you had 2 months of break even at 200 NL, and you had to do a lot of soul searching over this time. So first of all, why was this first 2 months so challenging for you? And what sort of soul searching did you need to do to come through it?
Yeah, so like whilst I was in consulting, I was winning like a ridiculous win rate for given how my ability. I think like I was playing like only 200 Zoom, which even though now obviously you say like 200 Zoom easy game, I still think relatively it's tough compared to the regular table, etc. Obviously a bad decision to play in the first place. But I was winning like 8 BB whilst I was consulting for like a reasonable sample, then quit, and I instantly won loads of money. I was like, wow, what a great decision this was. I was up like 10k, 50 buy-ins in the first like 8 days of the month when I went full time, and I was doing so much stuff as well to try and build up this BitB business, like coaching, like streaming all my study sessions, etc. And I instantly lost it all back, so I ended up like break even for the month. And then the month after I lost again as well. Month after lost again as well. So it was like break even in December after being up so much, then losing in February and January. The net amount probably wasn't that much, but like when I'd given up this like salary and suddenly I was like losing, it was like really probably the most difficult time I had in my whole career, actually, where I was like really questioning, like, is this like, was this a terrible decision all along? Like maybe I'm just so much worse than I thought I was. But at the same time, I was like, I have to make it work. So I was like really trying to improve harder than I'd ever tried this time. And I remember me and Donald went for a walk on some like mountains near Edinburgh, and we were like talking it through, and he was like, it was like really positive for me as well, like to have this support from him at this time as well, where we were like talking it through, and we're like, look, obviously you can win in these games, like there's stuff you can do to make you win more. And then yeah, after that stage, it was kind of like obviously very lucky, because it like variance has no memory, it could not have turned around. But after that stage, it kind of went up only for quite a while. And like, yeah, it was very nice for me as well, because, and again, lucky it did, because you start to get this feedback loop where it's like, I was doing badly, I tried really hard to study, and then started doing well, and you start to really believe that studying is good, which it is. But obviously a lot of the time you don't get this feedback loop and you give up, and then like you like change your habits for the worse. So yeah, definitely some luck in that all of the things happened as well. And like, yeah, it was just a very tough time, because I started to doubt all the decisions I'd made, kind of abandoned my big life plan, and then it was going very badly for a while.
Yeah, I think these moments in life are very key, like how you act in those moments and what kind of path you take, because often we'll make a decision, and like you did, to quit your job to go into poker, and you are already having success in poker on the side of your job. So your mind's like, all right, if I double down on poker, I can't lose. I'm going to have great success. You get 10k up, gets taken away, and then you're breaking even for 2 months. So as we're talking now, 2 months doesn't sound like a lot, but at that moment, it probably felt like a year. Probably felt like, what is going on? How can I beat this game? Have I made the biggest mistake of my life? Do I quit it? Do I hand it all in? I think these moments are like such like a kind of fork in the road moments, where obviously you had a great conversation with your friends, and you just basically came back going, you know what? I want to find a way to make this work. And you double down on study and double down on your approach. I think these are kind of the key moments where other players who might have similar opportunities to you, being in a similar situation, they might have reinforced that, wait a second, this isn't working. I'll just start looking for jobs. I might do something part-time to kind of ease the financial burden. Whereas you found a way to double down on poker. So I think it's good to reflect on that and go, yeah, this is how I came out of that patch. In terms of things you did differently, was there anything you changed? Obviously, you said you ran a bit better, you studied a bit more. Was there anything that you had to improve on in order to get yourself a winning player in those games?
I think, yeah, I like started to like try and like crystallize my game plan a lot more. Like I was like, I had some like vague, I had a plan basically. Like I never, in all like the common spots, I knew what I was trying to do and like why I was trying to do it. But what I was doing was like very, very simple. And the other thing is I was speaking a lot more to Daryl and stuff at this time. Obviously I'd been speaking to Daryl since I was like 16 years old, I guess. But like now I was back in poker, I was speaking a lot more to him and Cameron. And like I was playing so poorly against recreational players as well. I think this was maybe my biggest problem. And I was playing Zoom all the time instead of playing regular tables, which is like giving up a huge amount of EV in the first place. So yeah, I started to like take this side of the game a lot more seriously, get a lot more feedback. I was like studying with Daryl, who was at that time, well, still is, but at that time he was like a lot better than me as well. So this was like really, really helpful for me. So yeah, mostly like friends, honestly, and just keeping showing up, I think. And like I think this period, even though it's nowhere close to the biggest downswing I've had, nowhere close to the longest downswing I've had, but for me is like probably the most important one, because getting through that and starting to believe afterwards that you can get through it is something I can I always came back to afterwards. And I started to really believe that like how you deal with these patches of adversity is like what dictates your long-term success. And then you always have that to fall back on, like, even though it sucks so much in the moment when things are going badly, you know that like you've just seen it as well. In BitB, it helps as well. You have like always 20 students, so you always see it, that how well people act when things go badly are like probably by far the biggest determinator of how well they do in the long run. And if you keep repeating that mantra to yourself, it makes it easier when things go badly for you, I think.
100% agree. And yeah, it's such a valuable life lesson that you almost just need to learn. You need to learn like the hard way of going through a big downswing, or even just a 2-month downswing for you, and like realizing I can come out of this. I'm gonna be all right. I'll figure my way out of this, or variance will turn around. This is not like an endpoint. And yeah, like I said, I think it's so interesting when you speak with lots of players or work with lots of players in coaching arrangements, how players deal with adversity, how they deal with challenges very often dictates their career overall, because everyone's great when they're winning, but when you have these bad patches, what happens? How do you approach that? Do you keep playing your normal game? Do you study harder? Do you go into your shell? Do more mistakes start coming to your game? Do you start doubting yourself? Do you start getting risk averse? Like so many things happen just from you're losing right now. Can you deal with it? And yeah, I think it's good to like reinforce yourself. Like you've been through this before. It's not just another one of those cycles, just a bit of bad variance. I know how to get out of this. I think the longer you're in poker, the more that's important, because you go through prolonged stretches as you're moving up stakes. You go on your next biggest downswing of all time, and you've got to almost like relearn the lesson again, going, okay, can I be okay with losing? Can I just get through this patch? Can I find a way to work my way through this and come to the side? So yeah, I think it's a huge lesson to learn. So you mentioned that security is very important to you. You plan ahead. You don't take too much risk, and you've always played overrolled. Therefore, you've never went broke, which is definitely an upside. Where did this need for certainty come from? Where was the first time you realized, wait a second, I like security and certainty?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was like always very, very famous almost in our groups for being like risk averse, which you can say is like, I mean, it's definitely not maximum EV, that's for sure, like what I've done in my career. But at the same time, there's been like a lot of times where it's kind of worked out well for me for various reasons. But yeah, I just think it was just always I always had this idea that like, my parents were very, very frugal how they spent their money. So I saw that we had like quite a nice life without much money in like global schemes, the grand scheme of things anyway, at least. So I always kind of believed that like getting to a certain dollar amount, let's say, would like allow me to be comfortable in my life. And like, if I'm comfortable in my life, I can pursue the things I want and be happy in my life, which was like what I wanted. So I think that kind of, held me back from like risking like what I need to go for what I don't need, if that makes sense. And obviously like the number I thought I needed to have a comfortable life has changed as time's gone on. And like I played 200 an hour for so long. I literally had almost 1,000 buy-ins at some points when I was playing, and like I definitely went too far the other way. But yeah, it all came from just this idea that like I wasn't trying to get as rich as possible, basically, my whole career. That wasn't my goal. And I didn't have the belief that I could like beat 40k an hour or whatever. So like I wasn't trying to get there because I didn't think I could beat it, and then I didn't think I needed to get there to achieve the goals I had. So I would say that's where it came from.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of phase that a lot of mid-stakes players go through. When you start playing, say, 100 NL or 200 NL, all of a sudden, like, you make enough money to be comfortable. We'll call it, like, your living costs are comfortable. You can live like the life you want in the short term, and there's no real kind of financial pressures. And part of you, especially if you're not from a kind of rich background or around people who have got like affluent ambitions, all of a sudden you start going, well, I'm pretty happy with this. I don't need to be greedy.
Yeah.
I don't need to risk anymore. And the thought of risking this kind of comfortable, nice scenario, potentially lose at a higher stake that you're not sure if you can beat, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I don't need to be greedy. I don't need to make millions here. I'm happy with what I've got. I think this is a kind of limiting belief system that a lot of mid-stakes players go through. And often they limit themselves. Either they limit themselves in terms of not playing higher, or they stop even thinking about the progression as a poker player because they almost like stopping themselves from taking risks to potentially lose what they have. So I think it's a very interesting patch. And I think this is a phase that you had to go through. So in terms of poker as a safety choice, obviously, if you're this kind of security safety first guy, poker's not really the safest option for most people. Was there any conflict there from playing poker? Did your kind of risk aversion ever lead you to go, wait a second, this game of poker is maybe not for me?
I would say not really. I think like there's like when I was younger, I think maybe, but since I got professional, as I like to say, like since I quit my job, I don't think it. That would like maybe very recently in my like nosebleeds adventures and stuff, like I like doubted a bit what my approach was, but I never thought about quitting. I think that the one time I specifically remember I was like kind of thinking maybe I should never play poker again, was when I was in university and I like didn't go out on New Year because like I want to shot take 600 an hour. I think I've told the story on the BitB podcast a couple of times, but I'll speed run it where. So I quit, didn't go out partying, and I was like, I'm going to play 600 hour games. It's going to be unbelievably soft, right? I'm going to like take my shot take now. And DCC Nesquik, who I'm now very good friends with, he like 5-bet jammed like 6 free suited or something, I think it was, against me, and I pocket kings. And I was already down like 5 buy-ins, and then this was like deep spot as well. And yeah, he 5-bet jammed 6 free suited and like beat my pocket kings. And he posted in the chat, sorry, drunk lol. And then I was like, I distinctly remember at the time, I was like so broken because I'd like made this big sacrifice to like to go in. I'd lost like more money I'd ever lost by a long, long way. And like a lot of my actual money at that time, I guess, as well, like probably the biggest I've ever lost in like net worth % in a day. And even though it was 5 buy-ins, 600 now. And I literally remember I went to my car and I drove to like, I had nothing else to do. So I drove to like the 24-hour Tesco, and I was like looking around, being like, what can I buy to like ease the pain? And like lots of people have bought like some beers or something. I think I literally bought like mats for my car or something. I was like, yeah, I'll have some, like, at least I've got this now to fall back on my car. I'll be like tidier going forward. And then I was like in like a lost coma, just walking around Tesco at 3 a.m. in the morning. But yeah,
I thought you were going to say you drove to the edge of a cliff. I drove to the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, this would be the dark one.
Yeah, but it is one of those things like when you, it's interesting when you look back, because obviously we've got like hindsight as our kind of looking back on what's happened since then. But in those moments, like they feel like the end of the world. I'm sure all players can relate to having a session where it's like life as it was is over. It's never going to be the same again. I've failed. I can't get this back. And it's one of those like kind of deep reflection moments, especially when obviously you decided to take a sacrifice, not go out for New Year, and then just got slapped in the face with a big loss. So yeah, I think it's one of those, again, another like life lesson. Do you feel like you learned anything from that? Did that kind of toughen you up in any way? Did it make you more risk averse? Did you not shot take higher stakes after that? How did that impact you?
That exact one probably did make me more risk averse, because then after that I didn't really play 600 NL again, or they changed it to 500 NL. And I remember being tilted when Stars changed it from 400 to 500, because I was like, wow, now it's a even higher stake. I've got to risk all my money. But yeah, like honestly, I would say no. I think all of these moments, they're not like light bulbs for me. Like I said, I think it's more like holistic. Yeah, like every time it's new scar tissue, it's like another kind of barrier you've overcome, which you don't realize at the time, but in the long run starts to build up, and you get more and more like belief that like you can bounce back, because you bounce back from worse things yet again. And like the more you bounce back from something, the more you believe you can bounce back from the next thing that happens to you, which definitely is like the benefit the benefit if you can have any of all of these like terrible days.
What a great way to word it. It's building scar tissue. I've never thought of it like that analogy, but that's such a great kind of visual thing for me to think of. Like you're building scar tissue that allows you to deal with more adversity in the future, and you toughen up. Like this building resilience, almost like I think David Goggins talks about like callousing, building calluses on like the brain. Yeah, but it's the same thing, like building, like going through adversity to almost like toughen up and come back stronger. Like I said, each one of these moments isn't a big absolute in itself, but they stack up over your career. Like how you dealt with each one of these tells the story of your character here today, and all of the like little wins that you're kind of chalking up are scar tissue that you're building that allows you to be a more resilient version of yourself. So yeah, all very, very interesting. It all tells us the story of how you've managed to get to where you are.
Hi guys, Rene aka The Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement, because we are currently open to receive new players in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. In our program you will get access to 80+ hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now, one of these, of course, is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitative play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section, so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now, on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? And will you take one of the available seats? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and apply for the program, and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode.
So at some point you decided to move to the poker capital of Vienna, the capital of Europe at least anyway. What led you to make that decision?
Yeah, I was like, I think this was another lesson I learned, to be fair. When I was in consulting, I had a very, very good social life because it's kind of built into the job. You know, you move to a new city, you meet loads of people who've also moved to a new city. You're like traveling all the time. There's like beers provided by the company and stuff. And then when I moved to Edinburgh, I had like a couple of friends basically. And like by far the closest one was Donald. But my social life was far from ideal, I would say. And I started to really, I always thought I was kind of introverted, could live with myself. But I started to really realize like I like obviously missed being around people and like having a better social life. And with poker, it's harder to build that up because you move to a city and like you're just working on your computer and like outside of sports and stuff, more difficult to meet people. And I also already knew that like Daryl and Frank and Linus were living in Vienna. I'd visited a couple of times and seen how like good their life was because there's such a big community here, like inside and outside of poker, like much bigger group. And then I was in Barcelona. We traveled to Barcelona for the EPT, and we supposedly for the EPT, but no one actually played the tournaments. We just kind of went partying and drunk beers and played spikeball on the beach. And I met Marcus, mate boyfriend, and we were talking a lot about poker. Obviously impressed him with my epic understanding of the game. We talked like a bit about poker and like about plans and stuff. And he said he was also like considering moving to Vienna for a bit to try it out. So we like organized an Airbnb to like see if we liked it, like could live together okay and enjoyed it. And then kind of just went from there. It was like, I think we went, yeah, we got an Airbnb for a couple of months, really loved it and said we were going to come back. Then there was like all these COVID lockdowns. So got kind of stuck, then came back in the summer again and like got a permanent place. Then went back for Christmas and got stuck again because of the COVID lockdowns. And then ended up moving to like a bigger permanent place with Daryl and our old friend Frank. And then, yeah, but yeah, it's mostly just the realization for me that like Vienna is a very nice city, but like I think Edinburgh I prefer, like probably Vancouver I prefer as well. But the city itself isn't as important as like the people who are around you, I think. And it's not even close for me nowadays. I've realized like, yeah, the city is like nowhere near as important as the people, repeating exactly what I just said, but quite an important lesson for me at least.
It sounds like you've had some great poker players around you throughout your career. How do you feel like that's impacted your progression? Do you feel like you would have had as much success if you just solo grinded in Edinburgh or Newcastle? Do you feel like you would have came out the player you are now? Or do you feel like being around all these great poker players has shaped you? And if it has shaped you, what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned from being around really good poker players?
Yeah, 100%. I think like I'm like massively a product of the people I've met along the way. I think I was like, I do think I was like on an okay trajectory on my own. And I was always very good friends with like Daryl, for example, all through like my journey. But like just seeing the success that people have, like it's kind of the same as the downswings. It makes you believe that you can succeed because you've seen other people succeed and you've seen it happen before. And then like Marcus is like when I lived with Mark, I was like kind of just about playing like 1K when I moved in with Marcus, and like it just helped me to understand so many things kind of slid into place when I started talking to him more often about like how to build a strategy and like yeah, kind of and the way I like to say it to when I tell a story to my students is when I first started poker, I was like very, very interested in game theory, and like I was just interested in the math side of things, and to the extent where I was making like massive mistakes because of it, because I didn't really understand. I was like a poker professor, I'd like to say. Like I like kind of understood game theory concepts, like maybe better than some high stakes players. Well, probably not a lot, but they're completely useless because I was applying them like completely wrong. I think Moon has even said something similar on the podcast where he used like the 1 - alpha concept, this idea that you have to defend a certain part of your range, and he was like using it to always defend the part of his range to make the other player's bluffs indifferent, without realizing that the other player didn't have zero equity bluffs at some points. So maybe that resonates with some listeners, but I did the exact same thing where I like aimlessly calling down in spots where people were never bluffing, and then like thinking I had my only bluff when I had thousands of bluffs, and so yeah, I had all this theory ideas, and they were like making me play very, very badly, even if they made some mathematical sense on like a university paper. And then I kind of pivoted from that to like, I was like, well, this isn't working, so I just started copying people instead. I was like, all right, what are these guys doing? And like, it's obviously working for them, so I started to copy them. So it's like blind copy without too much understanding behind it in certain lines. And that was going like all right for me. And then I started to kind of get better understanding, like playing a bit better, moving up the stakes. And then I met Marcus, and it kind of brought all the two together because Marcus, Big Blind Bets, Limitless, they all had the same coach, this Internet. I don't know if you guys remember him.
The German guy, right?
Yeah. He had a CFP, and like this must be the most successful CFP of all time. It was before Pio, and it was like all these guys together, and he basically understood all the game theory ideas, but on like a much, obviously, unbelievably better level than me. And he kind of taught Marcus, Limitless, all these guys these ideas like before Pio. It's actually insane how strong he must have been. And like all of his ideas obviously eventually matched exactly what the Pio outputs were looking, the solver outputs were looking like. And Marcus kind of like brought me full circle, where he like brung back like all the stuff I was doing which worked. I didn't understand why. I could like suddenly start to understand back, because Marcus's understanding of the game was so much better and deeper than mine, that it kind of helped me to understand all the stuff which I was doing and working, why it worked, and then how I could like make it even better, the mistakes like my opponents were making, and how to like really study much more effectively. So yeah, Mark is definitely the biggest attribute to my success in these years, I think. And yeah, seeing him, like, this was when he was playing like 2K, 5K when he moved in with me, and then like within 6 months he was playing 100K now. So like seeing this journey from him as well, super inspirational. And then Daryl was probably the person I studied the most with, also huge impact on me. And then a lot of random breakfasts with Linus, where I like just spammed him with hands, or like tried to answer his hands with any kind of useful input. But yeah, so much help along the way. And finally, just so I don't miss anyone, I think like the other Frank, my other housemate, is not so well known. He's a very, very old time grinder. And these guys, they taught me a lot about like recreational players, because again, I was just didn't have a clue what was going on there. And like, yeah, learning more about like what works in practice and what really makes you money was very important for me as well.
So we've got the evolution of you as a poker player. We've got blindly following solver strategies and misapplying them to some degree. We've then got you living with great players and almost like copying their strategies blindly. And then we've got having like deep conversations and really figuring out like kind of the why behind the strategies and thinking at a higher level. So now I can see your kind of game like leveling up on a strategic level. But I'm always curious, like the mindset alongside this. So at this point, you've still got like kind of a bit of a risk aversion mindset. You've still got a bit of limited beliefs about like how far you want to go in poker in terms of how much you want to make. What are some of the limited beliefs you had to let go of in order to almost be pulled along on this wave that was upward trending? Is there anything you had to reassess or let go of?
Yeah, I think like I was actually thinking about this pre-podcast a bit because I was trying to, I don't know why this exact thought crossed my mind, like how did this happen? But I think first it was like clarity about the game. Like once I started to understand more like where the money kind of came from, it like made me like feel a lot more comfortable playing higher games, because if I can kind of visualize better like where the EV comes from, it makes it easier to visualize that it's coming to you. And pretty tangential, but I just think worth mentioning. I used to have like big superiority problems where I actually had kind of let's say for example I was playing 500 NL, and this is before I moved in with Marcus, and I would believe that I was good because I was like studying so much every day, but I would also know subconsciously or like even consciously, I would know that like there was something I didn't understand because these people were having like such better results than me playing like in ways I perceived to be bad. And I think the culmination of this actually was with one of your students, MJR, I believe his name was, or MBR or something.
MBR.
And I had unbelievable chat blow up at him where like, because his style was like very unconventional, and I was like, I was like accumulation of tilt, and I like had the worst chat blow up of my life where I was like telling him how bad he was and like how good I was and stuff like this. And like obviously this is like awful, but like it's just a demonstration of like this kind of like insecurity I had about my own play, I think, even though I was like putting in so many hours. And anyway, then, yeah, once I started to like have a lot more clarity and lose this insecurity and like start to understand more, like there are players who are better than me, and this is why they're better than me. There are players who are worse than me, and like this is why. And obviously poker is a very complex game. It's not like a full picture. It helped. And then finally, the other thing is, I think part of it is down to me because I was like, I like to think in my life I've always been very open to criticism from people, at least that I have a lot of respect for. But like Daryl and Marcus and stuff, I just always knew that if I was playing a game where they thought I was not doing well, they would tell me, and they have told me through my career at this when this happens, which is rarely because I'm so nitty with what I play. So that gives you like a lot more security as well, and you know that like you've got people around who are like who know what they're talking about and are gonna be honest with you about like the games you're playing. It makes it much more easy to push yourself, because if they say like, look, you're printing in this game, then it makes you believe it. And obviously when they're willing to take action or whatever as well, it's like putting their money where their mouths is, it matters even more. So yeah, it helped me a lot, I think.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've held on to this kind of need for certainty and security throughout your career, but the variables that have changed is you've gained more clarity, like where the edge is when you're a winner in a game. You gain more confidence in your approach to poker and how to beat the games, which has lowered the risk tolerance, or lowered the risk, kind of perceived risk of stepping up. If you feel very confident, all of a sudden the thought of shot taking higher doesn't feel like much of a risk because you're confident, and you've got great people around you to kind of keep you in check. I think it's amazing to have good friends who give you honest feedback. I think everyone needs a friend who can just tell them to shut the fuck up at times and to stop doing what they're doing, because so many people have like friends who will just like go, yeah, like they'll just support them what they're doing, even though like, they know they're going down a one-way train. So it's really good to have kind of honest friends who if you're playing games you shouldn't be, they would just tell you, go, look, stop playing those games, your games suck, you're not good enough, you're getting crushed. So I think having that is a great support system that allows you to take risks. All right, Rene, how about for yourself? Did you have any limited beliefs on your kind of say from mid stakes to high stakes? Do you feel like anything that you are holding on to that was maybe made it hard for you to move up?
I mean, I'm sure there were plenty. Like I remember for me, what was one of the biggest breakthroughs, which I mean, everyone has talked about it on the pod, and now George has also mentioned, like teaming up with the right guys. I started to work together with Poker Kluka, with Explode and another guy, and that basically, you know, multiple inputs, they come together. And I remember that, especially Explode in this case, he installed the belief in the group that we were going to become the best. And before that, I was just, you know, grinding month by month. I was happy that I was making money. So kind of similar story to George. I wasn't really thinking about becoming the best, but once he installed that belief, you know, and seeing other guys like at that moment, O2B, you know, crushing and being that was a big inspiration. And we were like, yeah, we can do that as well. And then you start to think, okay, well, if we're trying to become the best, what should we be doing? right? And then you suddenly start to study because you have a bigger goal. So I think that bigger goal was really important. And for me, especially, I think, a good exploitive player. I knew nothing. Like, I was the opposite of George. Actually, up until today, like math-wise, my math skills are very, very, very bad, which I guess was a blessing, especially back then, because I was thinking in the game way more practical, not theoretical at all.
Yeah.
And I was not studying theory at all, but I knew other players around me were deep into solvers, and I was studying other players. I was trying to learn from other players. So indirectly, I was also studying solvers, but I thought about way more. Like, they would make a play, and I would be like, oh, I'm in a tough spot now, or why does this play put me in a tough spot? And that's kind of how I learned. But then when I started to work with solvers myself as well and start to build like a more theoretical base, that's definitely when, I started to realize that I was in many cases, my exploitative strategy was exploiting myself, basically. So when these things kind of came together, that's when I started to skyrocket. So I think, to answer your question, the belief that the goal to try to become one of the best, and then the belief to actually become the best. And I think at some point, actually, I think at some point maybe a belief did hold me back. I think when I was at the peak, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna mess with big blind bets. I'm not gonna mess with Linus. I'm not gonna mess with Jasem Gill. I remember back then there were just a couple of guys that I was like, listen, I don't have to become the best because then I have to beat them. And I think and OTB, of course, how can I forget OTB? But I was like, yeah, is it really worth it to put in that much extra to try to beat them? And I was like, no, the smartest way is when Linus sits down, you leave the table. That was at some point my conclusion. That was kind of the smart side of me. I think it also really helped that I had people around me who were very successful. Throughout my career, I don't know if you remember him. Throughout my career, I always worked together with Scarface VLT. He already retired a couple of years ago. But he was always a big inspiration as well. Insane work ethic, made insane hours, and was on all sides, on all moments. That kind of that mentality of always playing in the right games and just being online, I really got from him. And I think, that kind of all came together. And then Explode really had that competitiveness in him. And Poker Kluka just an overall smart guy that would sometimes say, that your play is very bad. The uncensored. I still remember a clip.
You need this guy around. Yeah.
I still remember a clip where Kluka is burning one of my plays. Actually, I remember I made a bluff against Linus, and Linus made a good hero call. And then I was like, how can Linus call here? And then Kluka was just like, yeah, you're bluffing with a hand that's way too high up on your range. You're clearly over bluffing, and he's just making a good call. So stop whining about it. It's like very, very direct. Like, okay, good point, good call. Sorry, I was wrong here. I think I can definitely relate a lot to the story of George. And I know George has listened to a couple of the other podcasts. It's a common theme you hear coming back. No one does this alone, right? Having the right people around you is a very, very big determination of how successful you'll become, in my opinion.
Yeah. 100%.
I wanted to touch on a couple of points, mainly in the journey from breaking through the 200 NL and starting to move up, which was, I think, mainly seeing people around you. At some point, you just break through that belief, like, okay, I can do this as well. You mentioned a couple of things. I want to start off with, you said at some point you realized why other players were better than you and why other players were worse than you. I quote. So do you still recall like some of the reasons why some players were better than you and other players are worse than you? And what did you learn from that, and how did that impact your game?
Yeah, it comes back to what you were saying about when you said like, you're a practitioner first and then you started to study. And I think like it was just this transition in my mind from like thinking that like, oh yeah, like being good at poker means being able to mirror pile outputs, and then being like, hang on, like the people who win, they don't do this, and like nowadays you could ask me who I respect more, like the poker professor or the poker practitioner. It's like obviously the practitioner, like the guy who shows up every single day and like has amazing results without playing so much like a solver. I guess Stefan was like the best example of this of all. Who like, and even I would even say Marcus is this guy as well. It was like starting to realize that EV comes from like, let's say the most basic example, like over bluffing in spots where people underfold, over folding in spots where people underbluff, and then starting to see the people that did this, the people that didn't do this, like the people who like. Yeah, like even nowadays, if I see someone has a stat where they overfold in a spot where I know that like the average player over bluffs by a lot, I'm like, well, that's an objective leak because he's like folding bluff catches in spots where they should be winning on average. Therefore, that's like something that I can probably exploit and even passively starts to pass some EV to me. And then I also started to realize as well, it's like an ego thing. Like there was a guy, Tom Battle, a full ring grinder, who I remember I used as an example for the BitB videos, where like he was like notoriously not strategically a great player. Like he had a lot of like what would appear to be like baseline problems with his game. But every year he was making so much money. And I said to the guys in BitB, I was like, look, like we can sit here and we can be like, look, he doesn't do these things which we've seen in Pio, so like therefore we have like superiority over him. Or we can be like, look, he turns up, he makes money, like he makes a lot more money than most of us every single day. And we can be like, well, he's a better poker player because that's what poker's about. And why is it that he makes more money? Because some of his leaks aren't real leaks, like they're like leaks which don't cost him EV in practice, and because he's very good at the things which actually generate EV, which is game selecting, playing the right times, etc. And like you can't like devalue these skills because that is part of what being a professional poker player is. So I started to realize, put my ego to the side more and realize more that these soft skills are skills to be proud of and matter as well. And just want to say, in case Tom Battle, there's absolutely no shots at him because I respect a lot the fact he's played all these years and had the success he has, which is like hard to do when you keep showing up. So yeah,
this sounds very familiar. I think, and the response that we have, or at least that I heard you saying that I had as well, I would then get angry. You know, when a guy like that would show up my table and win, I would get angry. And then basically that anger kind of should have showed me that something is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I can actually learn something from them. And indeed, like, what makes a good poker player is so much more than you having a couple of good plays in your arsenal, right? It's like you can be great, but if you keep on game selecting wrong and keep on playing in the toughest games, you're going to be the biggest loser. So I think it's very important as well to estimate your skill. So what did Tom Battle teach you in the end?
Yeah, it just taught me this idea that like, it taught me that showing up and like game selecting maybe matters more than everything else at mid stakes and like lower end of high stakes. And just this idea that like if you're not doing this properly, then all of this time you're spending in Pio like gain extra X% of EV at a spot is kind of pointless if your aim is to make money. Obviously, if your aim is to play like Pio, then the ladder is important. And then secondly, I was like, well, if his strategic leaks are this big, like this obvious, and he's still winning, doesn't that tell me that like some of them aren't actually like costing him EV in practice? And then it started to push me more down that avenue. And then obviously started to like, Marcus was playing Stefan a lot of this time, and I was like, oh yeah, like what's Stefan doing? It's like obviously not what Pio's doing. Why is it that he's winning more than every single other player ever at this time at least? And then the same kind of ideas. It's like, yeah, the poker professor like doesn't play like Stefan. Poker professor wins a lot less money than Stefan. Why is it? So what are the things that Stefan's doing to transfer EV from his opponents to him? And yeah, then started to look at my own game and be like, well, are these things which I'm doing actually good in practice or not, and why? So it was more like using the solver less as a kind of output to copy, and more as a kind of tool to look more at real life strategies. And then just to continue with that, also once I realized the problems I was having, like in my Pio copying days, I don't think I was ever really a true Pio copier, as I would call them nowadays, like someone who tries to like truly mirror the solver. But I did start to realize that like there are a lot of things that when you try and mirror the solver, you always do wrong. Like you always make the same mistakes. And I was like, well, I know that some of my opponents like have like publicly gone on videos saying this is their strategy to mirror the solver. And then I would be like, well, these guys, they're obviously going to be doing the same things as me because they're human beings too. And like, it's just too hard to unless you have some like rules which aren't copy solver, you always end up making the same errors. So yeah, I started to really think more about how like different humans play. There's like and like how that can result in more EV to me in the long run. And again, with Marcus around, so it was unbelievably helpful for this because he's kind of thought as like I think a lot of people perceive him as like a Pio player, and he is very, very good, but it wasn't really what he's doing. So I'll go into don't want to go into too much detail there, but yeah, it was very, very helpful for me.
I remember actually recently, I think it was Kluka who said, yeah, you know, actually the better you get, the more you stop playing like Pio. I think like you have people who are bad that don't use Pio. Then in the middle, you know, when you use Pio, it's really good. And then at some point you go surpass Pio, right? You're like, yeah, okay, Pio has taught me a couple of basic principles about, you know, theory and GTO that I had to understand. But now that I understand them, I go beyond Pio and exploit the shit out of my opponents.
Yeah. And like, don't get me wrong, I use Pio every single day. Like, I mean, like thousands and thousands of hours, and probably thousands of hours still to come where I'm like running my own hands through Pio. But it's just like changing the reference point from being like, all right, I want to play the same as the output on the screen, to being like, what does the output on the screen tell me, and what does that tell me about if my play was good or bad, and how I might want to change it, and like, what does the strategy look like on the screen? Is that realistically something I can do, and is it something I even want to do? Like, and if not, what can I do? Which is kind of good and possible. So yeah, I think I just agree with you for sure. It's like one of the biggest flaws that I see is people trying to like holding like copying solver outputs on a pedestal and thinking that's what makes you money in poker, when I really don't think it's the case.
I took a look at your I think it was your BitB coaching profile, and it said that at your profile it said, I adopted Piosolver at a very early age and think one of my greatest skills is being able to use it efficiently to develop real strategies that work in game. A lot of people waste a lot of time in the wrong way. You also mentioned a little bit earlier about that you were lost in the rabbit hole of Pio. What do you think is like the biggest mistake that people make, and like which rabbit holes did you go down through in Pio that in hindsight were a big waste of time?
Yeah, let's think about this. It's I think just the one, maybe not the biggest one, but the one that comes to my mind first of all is like you can just look at a node. I mean, I guess a basic one which most people are aware of now is like turn double barrels, that you see bet the flop, you bet the turn. And it's very easy to ignore certain parts of the range. Like, at least this is what I did for a long time. I was like, well, let the open end straight draws, they barrel here pretty often, right? And then I'd be like, all right, cool, that's basically what I'm doing. Then I would like completely ignore all the fractional hands, which like cumulatively add up to a lot of the range and are very important for like where the EV comes from. And especially when you start to consider what the other player might do to make better or worse. Yeah, so like just look and be like, all right, my hand does kind of what I thought it would do. Sure, move on. So that's one of the mistakes. Another mistake is like striving really hard for accuracy, I think. It's like, yeah, trying to be like too accurate rather than looking at the holistic picture. Aggregate reports, I think, are like, I think most people spend too long doing aggregate reports. I would say it's definitely subjective, but for me, I think like flop strategies can be, are in general, so close in EV, particularly between sizings. Maybe if you want to range bet every board, then you do need to spend more time in aggregate reports to figure out which ones you can and can't. But yeah, flop strategies are so close in EV that kind of picking your poison, like picking how you want to play, and then sticking with it, learning to implement it and going from there is probably better than spending hours and hours trying to chase that tiny extra bit of EV. And there was something else I was going to say, but it slipped my mind now. But yeah, these kind of ideas, I think accuracy is the biggest problem people have, like striving for accuracy, striving for perfection at the cost of like implementation. And then this is why I think, yeah, when you're a practitioner and you're playing every day, you start to realize like what is possible to do rather than what is possible on pen and paper to do.
Yeah, it's like, you know, you can spend all the time in aggregated reports and find all the optimal flop sizings, but in the end, if you don't really understand what a certain sizing achieves on a certain board and how that's going to influence the hand playing out on a later street, then basically, yeah, you can start with a certain flop sizing that was theoretically correct, but if you then butcher the hand on a later street because you don't know how it then plays out, because you didn't really understood why the strategy was there in the first place, it's maybe better you just stick to something that you understand. I think playing a strategy that you understand is always going to be superior than a GTO strategy or at least a GTO sizing that you don't really understand the mechanics behind.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like a very good example of this, I would say, is dud one who you had on your podcast. But I respect. I think he's like. I think he's one of the very best players in the world still, and also very, very. I respect a lot about his game. He's like very aware of his own edge as well, and like doesn't take close spots. And obviously has insane results over a big sample. But he's always played like a very, what some people consider a very simple strategy, and I know for a fact what some people would consider a very bad strategy. Like I've seen Run It Once videos, for example, where people say the way he plays it is bad without saying it about him. But the way he understands his strategy so well and plays it so perfectly that it's like a lot better than a lot of strategies which on paper make capture more EV. So yeah, just a very good example of this, like someone at the very high stakes. And then there's the flip side of this again was like Stefan at his peak. Well, maybe Stefan is still at his peak, but he seems to be AFK somewhere. But where he would like really understand how people who tried to implement complex strategies would make mistakes. I think I never spoke to Stefan, but this is what it always looked like he was doing, and then like absolutely massacre them in the spots where like they're making mistakes with their complex strategies, and they would never understand it. So like, look, Stefan's shown up with another hand again, which is like a 3 big blind mistake in Pio, and like I'm playing this strategy, so I'm beating him without understanding that like what he's doing is he's like anticipating the mistakes you're going to make, and you are making them, but you just aren't aware of it. So yeah, just two different approaches, but both kind of thinking along the same lines, I think, really.
You mentioned that in order to progress your strategy, I wrote down your game was too simple. And another thing you wrote down was bad versus recreationals. But to highlight the game was too simple, what was the difference between You-Mad-Br0 simple in the past and Dut's recent simple?
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting question because I'm not really like, so I've never really watched poker videos or whatever, for whatever reason, just never gelled with me. It's like a way to learn. But the one video, the one person who I always watched was Uri Peleg. And he did a coaching once for BitB, like when I was like still playing 200L, I think maybe, or maybe a bit earlier, for BitB tournaments. And I showed up to it because I was like, wow, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. He was obviously Dutch coach, but I didn't know until afterwards. And what he basically showed me is my strategy, which I thought, well, I'll tell you, my strategy was like range bet everywhere possible, like bet 1/3 everywhere possible. Because I thought people wouldn't check raise me enough, they fold a bit too much, etc. But then Uri started to show me, he was like, oh yeah, like his whole coaching was based on this product. It was like, how do you exploit the strategy which everyone uses? Because in tournaments it's even more common. And he made me realize like there's a lot, like it's very obvious now looking back, there's a lot more facets you have to think about rather than just like, is someone gonna check raise or fold enough? And like there was a lot more ways which like my strategy was like flawed in ways I just didn't have any understanding of. And I think Uri had a very first principles approach, and I still think his videos are really, really good. I know like Marcus watches his videos and often says the same. It's like, yeah, it's kind of sick how he can anticipate this is why I did this, and it's like actually why. Because yeah, he had like a very good first principles approach, and so he like understood things from the game theory point of view, and then he also was very good practitioner, like knew about like mistakes that human beings make and how you can use those to get EV for yourself as well. And then obviously his students have absolutely ludicrous results over the years. So another one who has just definitely helped me a lot, even if it was just through 1 hour of coaching for BitB tournament. That it was kind of, I don't necessarily think the simplicity was bad. It was just that I didn't really understand what I was doing. Like you said a minute ago, I didn't really understand my own strategy and like what the implications were for kind of downstream nodes as well as I wanted to. I kind of looked at power, I was like, range betting here doesn't lose EV much, so must be fine, without thinking like, what's Pyro doing to make sure that it doesn't lose EV by using this strategy.
So where, in your opinion, is then sort of the sweet spot? I have some mixed feelings about this as well in terms of, should we keep the game simple? You know, where does simplicity come in? Like, obviously, you were in an extreme. You just went range bet, range check, probably certain boards, and you will use one sizing. That's probably like the most simple you can go. Your game, I assume, has developed, but I do. You do still try to keep certain things simple, or how does your game look now, and how have you applied, or how has simplicity evolved? for you?
Yeah, I would say overall, like my approach, the BitB approach is on the simpler side of things. Like not quite as extreme as some people, but definitely on the simpler side of things. It's a very subjective question because we know for sure that some people at the nosebleeds play very complex strategies and do well. We also know that the other side of things, like I said. So I think like you can definitely just by that logic, you can definitely argue both sides comfortably. For someone who's learning poker and coming up, though, I would always say like limiting your options will just help you, because I think like the more you can visualize your own game plan, the more you start to realize the problems that people are going to have with theirs. And like it's kind of, for me at least, this is how it worked. I was like, I can visualize what I'm supposed to be doing here, start to see that other people might be making the mistakes I used to make, and then how can I transfer really from that. Whereas the more complex your game is, the more you struggle to visualize, in my opinion at least, because it's just harder for your brain to contain so much information. But then I would say once you've reached a certain level, you start to like, you can start to like, once you've reached a certain level and you have a certain understanding of like what different bet sizes achieve, what different strategies achieve, you can start to re-add the complexity in. But it's just being confident, you know, like, I think I would actually say the main thing is, if you know the signs that someone is like stiffening you and punishing you for your complexity, and you can be sure either that they're not truly punishing you, or you can readjust to like make sure that they don't keep doing it, I think is the important thing. And most people when they start wouldn't be capable of seeing those signs, I would say.
So what would be what would be the signs that someone is exploiting my complex strategy? What are like the first signs to look for?
It's like it's a difficult one, because like it's a question where I'd have to like roundabout answer, just because I think some of the ideas weren't only mine, and I don't want to like share stuff other people told me. But I guess I mean, I guess the most obvious example is like if someone takes a wild showdown against you, like makes a bluff catch, which you know is not an equilibrium bluff catch, or you look at afterwards and it's like clearly not equilibrium bluff catch, and this player is a good player who is likely to also know it's not an equilibrium bluff catch, then just start to think like, why might he have done it? And is he correct in his assumption, is basically the way I'd put it. Or vice versa, where like someone makes a bluff which is clearly not an equilibrium bluff, and you know that he knows it's not an equilibrium bluff, be like, why might he have done it? And just be very objective to be like, is he right or wrong? Because obviously the natural implications be like, this fucking idiot, mate, he's bluffed me with this combo and I'm like defending this spot perfectly, but like it's obviously very often not the case. So yeah,
there's maybe a small nuance, you know, maybe overall on that spot you play good, but there's a small nuance in the texture or in whatever timing you gave away. I don't know what kind of small nuance, you know. That, and it's very important, I think, and this is kind of also where I think the ego comes in, right? To put it on the side, especially when, you know, you might have got owned. The first response, if your ego is still very present in you, is indeed to say, I'm so lucky, my strategy wins against his strategy, he's such an idiot, look what he's doing. But once you can put that ego on the side and be like, hold on for a minute, this guy's a good player, why does he do that? And that's when I think you can really progress.
Yeah, 100%. I think like the really important thing I see from a lot of people again is like you shouldn't put people on a pedestal, and you shouldn't assume they all play perfectly. Like the best players in the world still make mistakes, but equally you've got to think in a kind of Bayesian way. And like if Davy Jones makes a non-equilibrium play against you, then you maybe want to, and it's like obviously a non-equilibrium play, you shouldn't assume like, oh, Davy's made a huge error. You should be like, all right, this guy who's winning 8 big blind, battling the best in the world for forever, he's probably done it for a reason, and like it's more likely his reason is correct than I've just owned him. And I think this is where like the ego comes in. It's just you have to really be objective and assume that good players tend to make decisions for a reason.
It requires also a certain level of confidence. I think it's normal that when you're developing your confidence, what kind of helps is to kind of assume the rest are just bad. And sometimes at certain stage in your career, it kind of helps to kind of overestimate yourself and down talk a little bit on people, just to give you a little bit that extra push, you know, so that you actually go out and punish them. But I think that at some point, actually, Poker Kluger comes to mind again. He said, no, he's very good, but I'm still going to beat him. You know, that's like, that's real confidence right there. You don't have to down talk your opponent. You say you acknowledge that he's very good, but he's still going down, right? That's like, then that's in my opinion, a sign of true confidence.
Yeah, and like, yeah, I think the most important thing in poker is just self-awareness as well. It's just like people, everyone who plays poker professionally is like good, relatively speaking, and then there's levels of good, and like obviously it depends if you're playing six max with fish, less important. But if you're starting playing heads up and stuff, you have to know, like, you have to be able to judge where your EV comes from, and like the players that you just aren't going to objectively beat, or it's going to be a tough career for you. And like, yeah, I think for me, once I start, like, I have a lot of confidence in my own game against certain people, but then, like I said, Davey's a good example. I just, like, objectively, I can't say that I'm going to sit at the table with him in a free-handed game and have good results when, like, the weight of evidence is so much in his favor. Like, I know the games he's been playing, they're not games I would play. I know his results are like absolutely ludicrous for such a long time, supposedly. So with that information, it wouldn't be a great assumption for me to sit down and think that I'm gonna do well, I think.
Why? So is it then a lack of self-awareness? Because I always wonder why people still sit down three-handed with, for example, the past was Linus, or Mike Boyfin, or David Jones. Why do people? There's always some guy that thinks like, hey,
yeah.
Linus and David Jones. That seems like a good game to
This
sit
is
down.
the game
is
for
this
me,
lack
mate.
of self-awareness, or how does Linus still get action after 5 years? Seriously.
Yeah, it's like, I think some people are self-aware and they know they're like, all right, they don't have the same goals, like I said, I was always kind of thinking like I want to be professional in poker and like do well, whereas other people they play much more for like they like make a lot of money, but they're also a lot more like less concerned about playing minus EV games, which is fair enough. Obviously, it's a different approach. So some people are doing that. Some people do just genuinely have the lack of self-awareness, I think, and like every human being overestimates themselves compared to other people as an aggregate, I would say. So like it's not that surprising, especially with poker, with like all the emotions that flow through you when you're playing, etc. And like then there's the people who look at Pio outputs and they think like, fucking hell, look at these posts in MVG. I've seen Davey. He's like made this play which isn't in Pio, therefore like, and I'm going to beat him because he's doing this. So yeah, it's like a mix of things, but I do think some of it does generally come down to lack of self-awareness. And also like the other thing I always think, which is very subjective and different people have different approach. I know Zas on the last podcast, so I absolutely love Zas, by the way. He's one of my favorite players. Like the podcast was awesome, and like I love his approach to the game. He just does not care. Like he just loves poker, I think, and loves playing against people. But I think that like if you play like Zas plays, where Zas is not the only example, but if you decide you're going to go play everyone, kind of like what Lions did when he was coming up, right? And if you're right about yourself being the best, then obviously like you end up having crazy results because you like put yourself in spots where you're winning, everyone's prepared to play you do well, but like it's a high variance approach to the game. And if you kind of do more what I did, which definitely suited my risk tolerance better, where you don't take the close spots, my upside is definitely lower, but my downside, I think there's very few timelines where I would have ever gone broke. Whereas if you keep playing, if you kind of keep looking for the edge, eventually you're going to find it. Like almost everyone who's ever looked to play everyone ends up playing someone who they lose to. And like, yeah, it's a much higher variance approach to the game. You just have to be prepared to take the downside with it, which I think a lot of people genuinely are, though. There's a lot of people who battle everyone, and they know that like, all right, I might not be winning this battle, so it's not necessarily like they're sitting down thinking that they're winning. They're prepared to like pay the price to learn, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned multiple times, and I have this written down as a question as well. You mentioned many times where the money comes from. So I'm going to ask you, where in your opinion does the money come from, and where do you think people are often wrong thinking that the money comes from?
Yeah, I mean the obvious like cop-out answer, which is the correct answer, is the recreational players, obviously, because against the reg, if you think a reg overfolds and you like bluff the worst combo in your range because it makes money now, then the reg is going to have some conscious reaction to it. So like if I'm playing against you and I think you overfold a spot and I bluff with the missed ace I flush draw, you're going to see the outcome and be like, well, he probably thinks I overfold there, so next time I'm probably just not going to fold a bluff catcher, or at least make some reaction. So your upside is limited, whereas a fish, he doesn't know what combo is supposed to bluff and which combos aren't supposed to bluff. So you can like play your whole range as bluffs, and you don't have to put your value hands in the same sizing as your bluffs, etc. So like for that reason, it's like a cop answer, but obviously like the EV gains you can make against fish are like absolutely like on a different scale to regs. And then in terms of like reg versus regs, so if you were telling me like I'm going out to battle regs and I need to be like, where's my win rate coming from? This is more subjective, but the way I tend to think about it is if I'm like trying to like out like game plan someone, I don't really want to be there. So I don't want to be sat at a table where I'm like, all right, it's my game plan against his game plan, and I'm just going to hope that mine yields more EV. So I'd rather like know that I can play my game plan, but there's some spot which I know about where I'm going to like turn this reg into a fish effectively, where I'm going to not quite as extreme as what I said. I'm not going to like have a sizing which is only bluffs. Like against fish, obviously you have sizing which you only have bluffs in, and you bluff every combo in your range. But I'll have a spot where I like over bluff a lot or over fold a lot or something. A spot where there's like an EV transfer from him to me, which is much more than just like, oh, my c-bet strategy is slightly better than his or something. So yeah,
this is, I guess, more of a, so you have your strategy which you think is solid, but you have a couple of conscious points where you know you're gonna transfer EV from him to you.
Exactly, yeah. And like obviously there's lots of reg battles that go on which aren't necessarily like this. Like the current like GG 20k battles, I'm not sure if the guys playing like think like, oh yeah, this spot I'm gonna like it's like Davey, Linus. I mean, there's actually absolute madness going on GG at the moment. It's Davey, Linus, Zas, Daryl. There's loads of guys who are coming in there. Nacho. So yeah, I'm not sure if they have these ideas, but at the same time, they're always, I think, on the lookout for like where someone slips up, you know, like where someone makes a sizing which isn't part of their actual strategy or something like this, or timing it could be, I guess, or if yeah, something else that happens. I don't.
Yeah, when someone slips up, they notice. For example, if everyone has been in this situation where your gut just tells you, or a certain sizing comes out, it's like, yeah, this does not make any sense. Sometimes, you know, you just slip up. I played a hand, I think yesterday, literally, and I choose the sizing. It's like, oh, wait, this actually makes no sense. It's just that for exactly my hand, which was a bluff, this sizing actually made sense because of the blocker, blah, blah. From my range perspective, this is a non-existent sizing. And this is where good players, they just instantly punish you. Then you see the kind bank, and if he's a good player, you're like, oh shit, yeah, obviously he will read right through this. I'm such an idiot.
Yeah. I know the exact feeling where you make a play like, oh, wait, hang on a minute, this is only bluffs at this is only
bluffs exactly here. Right. It's like, oh shit, this play, or it's only value. It's like, oh shit, the only reason I make this play is because the actual hand triggered me to make this play or choose this sizing. And sometimes then if the player is like, hey, this is odd, then it's like, what triggered you to choose this sizing? Oh, is it more likely that it was a bluff that triggered you to choose the sizing, or a value hand that chose this sizing or this line? And that's where good players, they're kind of, they will definitely punish you. And I guess that happens a lot at those limits.
Yeah, but they absolutely kill you,
But I mean, then again, they don't slip up that easily.
Yeah,
but then again, often, you know, we still play against humans, people who have a range in their game. Sometimes they will play better than others. So I guess also, I think what you mentioned, the person who can execute a strategy most consistently is a very important skill. In all limits, but especially at those limits, just simply because, you know, you have to be at the top of your game, in order to beat those guys.
Yeah, definitely. And like that, like I would never consider playing these games that are going on, but well, partly because I would be losing heavily, but also just in general, like the variance and stuff. But there are like these guys, some of them are making mistakes and stuff like this, and some of them, like I probably wouldn't say on this podcast, but there are players who I would like take the action of in these games, for example, if that makes sense. So I do think they're beatable even at the highest levels. Although the GG rate does make it more problematic than the old stars rate.
Yeah, they should just go play lower stake and do markup.
It's just so much more complicated, I think. And then try and play on ACR, and it's just like the blind lobby creates problems and stuff. But yeah, I think the other thing I was going to mention as well is there is the problem nowadays. Like when it was like all on stars, there was like not really much 10k NL that ran, and there was a lot of 5k NL battles that ran. So you got kind of like reasonable samples, or like people had a general idea of like who was good and who was bad. Whereas now when there's like 100k running sometimes, 200k running sometimes, 40K running, sometimes like results are like very, very wildly different to like reality, I think. And it creates like God complex in some people where they don't realize like that they've run well, and then the opposite in other people where they don't realize they've run badly. And then this creates more of these kind of battles, I think, as well, because of that. It's very hard to like unanchor yourself from results, but now with the differences in stakes, like the results are like becoming less and less a reflection of skill level, at least in my opinion.
You mentioned the God complex. So this is, I guess, when you go with the swings, in this case, in the up, you think you're a little bit better than you might actually be. Everyone listening, me included, George included, Adam included, has been there. How does God complex show in George? And have you, nowadays, I assume over the years, you become more aware of when it happens so you can correct faster. Well, what is a sign that George is on a God complex? What do you do?
Yeah, we even have it in our coaches channel on BitB. It's me, Marcus, Pisek, and Daryl often talking about hands, and like you see a hand of like, mate, this is God complex. It's just like deciding that someone is over bluffing so much that it mostly is in, obviously the more hot you're running, the less risk averse you become. So it's not normally like massive hero folds. It's normally the opposite, massive hero calls or massive like ridiculous bluffs because you decide he has exactly one combo or something. Yeah, this kind of aspect of things. And I definitely had like my swings in like right now I've like took a step away from the nosebleed adventures, which I was only playing like recreational softer games anyway in these games, and had a small piece of myself, but didn't go great for me. But like at the beginning it went pretty well when I was playing like 10K to 40K, and I started to like, I think it made me play better in a lot of ways, but also started to make more ridiculous plays like and they were going well, so it made me make more ridiculous plays until the point I started to make some minor CV plays because of this, because you kind of forget to respect your opponents as much as you should do when things are going really, really well for you.
Yeah, I remember I think I read somewhere, and I had experienced that as well. It's like when you feel like the other peoples don't understand you anymore, so you feel like you're at a certain level with your thought processes about hands. And let's say, for example, your case, you speak to Daryl, Mike, and Boyfin. You're like, guys, you just don't understand what I understand. That should be a sign. I remember I had this with Explode Kluka, and I remember still very clearly. I was in the high, I was battling O to B, and I was floating a hand that's basically. The fact that I floated that hand meant that I would fold 0% to his C. I was floating on like an ace-high board. So, guys, floating out of position, ace-high board, perceived call range too strong, bluff river, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, but you're playing against OTB and you're not floating. Literally, like, this is probably the first 5% hands that you will ever, that you would just snap fold to a C, but you're floating now. I'm like, yeah, guys, but you don't understand. This is such a good play. Obviously, I was just, I was suffering from well. God complex.
Yeah. Common.
You do a lot of coaching as well, you mentioned. I was wondering, in your opinion, I think you already shed a light on it. What, in your experience, is one of the biggest, how can I say, the biggest contributor to a student succeeding and a student failing? I think you already talked about dealing with adversity. Any other things that come up? In your opinion, that if you look at like, oh, these students didn't make it, these students did make it, what was the difference between them? Because they received, or assuming that they received, the same coaching.
Yeah. So first things first, I would say like the coaching makes you appreciate variance so much, because with the students, you have all their hands. So like, and you have all their showdowns, and then you have hand to note where you can really see what their strategy looks like. So you do get players who like you just know are playing well, like like they're like bluffing the spots where like they're playing perfectly against recreationals, obviously, and you know that like their strategy is like well balanced, or if it's unbalanced for a good reason, and they lose, or vice versa, where you know a player's playing badly and they win. So it does make you really appreciate the variance, and so that leads me to the obvious answer, which is it's how well they deal with the variance, because over a year, like variance over a year is crazy, like how things go, like not that they're like vaguely based on your strategy. I mean, a bit more than vaguely, I guess, if you don't mix stakes too hard. But over your career, like how you deal with variance matters so much, because like these guys who have good game plans and are losing, like obviously they can get disheartened and quit, or they can keep going. And this is part of the value of the coaching as well, I guess, because you can really show them on paper, being like, look at how you're playing. Like we have it like laid out here perfectly hand to mouth, and look at like how the coaches are playing. It's like very identical. The coaches have made millions and millions of dollars from this game. So it helps a lot with mindset there. I think self-awareness is the other thing as well. Like we talked about already, it's like if you're going to like start thinking you're a bit good and then start battling everyone, it's just not going to end well for you on average. Like even if there are like outlier outcomes. So yeah, it's like continuing to be humble, like having confidence where it's correct to have confidence, and not having confidence where it's correct to not have confidence, basically, I think is super important as well for students. And there is some like innate ability thing, and work ethic obviously goes without saying. Like when you join BitB, we're not really like spoon feeding information in quite maybe not the best way, because all of the coaches are playing poker the whole time, and a lot of it is kind of, we try to put people in a really immersive environment where they have like, if they want to learn how to play a node, there's a video on that node, because we've done every node by this point. But a lot of it is like we stream all our study sessions. So they have the 2 coaching sessions a week, the one-to-ones, and then every study session I've done since I was playing Tournament now, pretty much I would say I've streamed for BitB. But like you're showing up there and I'm studying my hands, I'll like answer questions from the chat, but I'm not going to like spoon feed like why I'm range betting this flop and why I'm playing 75 on this flop, because I don't have time to do it whilst I'm trying to do my own study as well. So a lot of it is like taking the time to show up to this, but then going away afterwards and like really understanding what you took away. And the guys who have the most success definitely have this really good work ethic and good response to adversity, I would say.
And I guess also the guys that don't get spoon-fed the answer, they actually like it because they are problem solvers and they like to problem solve. And I think that's a very important characteristic in a poker player. Whereas the guys who want to have it spoon-fed, they kind of look for a shortcut. And given how competitive, especially high-stakes poker is, yeah, that mentality, basically you already know from the start that's not going to make it. Yeah,
it's like a self-selection when you put it that way. It's like, yeah, the people who want to solve the problems are going to do well, which means that, yeah, the people who show up do well. But yeah, I think it's like, it is different as well because there's different stables with different approaches. Obviously, like BitB, we treat as like, it's obviously been very successful over the last years, but ultimately me and Darryl and Patrick, we treat it as like an extension, and Marcus as well. We treat it as like an extension of our own poker game. So we're not going to like spend hundreds of hours like making like custom lines for every spot. We're not going to tell the students like this is exactly what you should do in this spot. We're more like doing things a lot more holistically. Whereas the stables where the business owners like aren't playing poker like anymore, they're like more inclined to kind of create like a hive mind bot, if that makes sense, where it's like they just take a player and it scales way better as well. Like if you're trying to get 100 players, you can't do what BitB does because it just doesn't work. Like you
so basically you're just opening up for people to take a look at what you do. When you do a study session, you share it. When you play a session, you share it. That's kind of more the way they learn, I guess. Yeah, and we have obviously a lot of resources as well, and they have like dedicated coaching sessions twice a week as well. So I don't want to undersell that side of things, but yeah, it's not like we're not giving them a book with like our game plan written down on, if that makes sense. It's more about like how to think about poker. I understand what you mean. And in my opinion, like if I would do a coach, let's say I would do a coaching session with you, I would probably be most interested in reviewing you play or railing you play and asking behind your thought process, because in the end, how someone thinks about the game or the variables that he takes highly in making his decision, that's where, in my opinion, you can learn from a lot. So in my opinion, it would be way valuable. Let's say we do a coaching session. I would be way more interested in your game than you taking a look at my game, because I want to know how you think about the game. And that's where I can learn from, like, oh, interesting. So these are the variables that you rate very highly in this decision. This is how your decision making looks. This is what you find very important. Okay, great. That's because like a lot of things, you can think about poker in many ways. You can approach it in many ways. And I think what you can really learn from good players is seeing how they approach it. Obviously, strategical, there's also interesting things. And obviously, if some people would look at my game or vice versa, they could find things or flaws in my thought process. But that would be something that I think is most valuable. I think also in my experience with CFP, we had exactly the same things. If we could just keep players be consistent, right? Because like you said, when they're in an upswing, they play more, they play less, study more, study less. So in the end, consistency is key. And I think the key to being consistent is to estimate variance. So if you can analyze your game for variance other than just ONEV, and take a look at your stats and compare them indeed with, like you said, for example, stats with crushers, and you see, listen, strategically, you're playing basically identical, only here, based on these filters, there's a lot of variance in your game that gives that stability, and then they don't go do something crazy, right? A big problem is that people will alter a winning strategy because they feel like they have to do something because they're losing, right? So that I thought was a very big one. And probably the most important one, which I'm sure you have probably encountered as well, is when a student is faced with financial pressure. If someone deals with financial pressure, I think literally everyone who didn't make it to our CFP, there was, or at least that didn't perform as well, there was some form of financial pressure involved, which I think it makes it way harder to be process oriented. So, and they will just, performing under financial stress. This is probably where we should consult admin. Hi guys, Rene aka the Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement, because we are currently open to receive new players in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. In our program, you will get access to 80 plus hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now, one of these, of course, is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitive play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section, so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now, on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the Mechanics of Poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? And will you take one of the available seats? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and apply for the program, and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. But for now, without further ado, let's get back into more goodness in today's episode. Adam, how much of your cognitive abilities are decreased when you perform under stress? You probably come up with a great number now.
No magic formula for that one, I don't think. But obviously financial pressure is going to put a lot of strain on your game. And very often it's just attachment to results. So you feel the losses more. You try to force players more. Rather than thinking about poker as a strategy game, being curious, you're thinking, how do I win? When am I going to get a good session? And all of a sudden you always get blindsided by what matters. And the more financial pressure builds, the more you wake up in the morning thinking, I want to win today. You're not thinking about the game anymore, how to improve and how to get better. And this just builds and builds. And the more players obsessed with money, or in a situation where they need to pay the rent next week, or they've got lots of pressure on them, the ability to think is just completely downgraded. They're playing poker now and they're like, got to win this hand, got to win this session. So their creative abilities, their full potential as a poker player is just not on display. But again, it's very subjective, because you can have some players who in theory are under a lot of financial pressure, but they don't feel it the same. They kind of got a high risk tolerance and they're like just playing carefree. You've got other guys who've got 1,000 buy-ins sitting in the bank and they're like, oh, the money is under pressure here. I had one guy who had I think he had 8 months of full living costs covered, and he was feeling a lot of financial pressure, like day to day, week to week, as in I need to make money this month. And I was like, where's this pressure coming from? And he just created a kind of analogy for his own life where I can't be moving backwards. If I don't make money this month, that's one month closer to ruin, 1 month closer to being bankrupt and having to sell stuff to make money. I was like, whoa, you've took it really far here. So yeah, relationship with money is really big. Risk tolerance is really big. How we deal with adversity, as George was saying, super, super big. And yeah, obviously then when you kind of bring a lot of factors together with certain profiles, you might have a low risk tolerance. You put them on a downswing, you create financial pressure, you create like a bit of a melting pot of kind of bad attributes that are going to lead to a kind of derailing of that person, so to speak. So yeah, it's very interesting. And poker is so diverse. I always feel like it's so interesting. I like to like thought experiments with like George said, could you take that guy off the street and train him to be good at poker?
Yeah.
And like there's such an optimistic part of your mind that wants to go, yeah, of course I could. And there's another part that's going, a realistic part that's going, you wouldn't make it. You wouldn't be able to build all the attributes. I couldn't get him to the level needed to deal with everything poker requires. And sometimes you don't really know what kind of cocktails needed. I remember my friends, like 3 of us did really well in poker, and we tried to like kind of convince other parts of our friend group to kind of give it a go. And in theory, they were like kind of smarter than us, good at maths, good at like risk tolerance, but every one of them had other flaws that held them back. And we couldn't even see at the time. We thought we were bad at coaching, which we definitely were, but we couldn't see that all the attributes that needed for it to make a good poker player, and some of them were just missing. Like he was talking about, one of my friends just like to be spoon fed, so we were giving him all the information, and as soon as we didn't give him the information, he couldn't problem solve for himself. Another one just couldn't deal with the amount of kind of uncertainty. How do you deal with uncertainty? When am I going to start winning? I remember he used to ask every day, when am I going to start winning at him? I was like, I don't know. Like, we don't even know when we're going to start winning.
It's a bad question to be asked.
When am I going to start winning? I like it.
Yeah, so and then the months went by, and he's just like, well, I don't know when I'm going to start winning. I was like, okay, well, you don't need this. So yeah, I think the attributes that go into a winning poker player or a successful poker player are very diverse, but I think all of us have been around a lot of poker players. We can see a lot of common attributes across players, and we can also see warning signs that might make it more challenging for poker players. So a question I want to ask you, George, is what do you think has been the greatest contributor to your success? As we talk about, there's lots of things that you've done over the years. Is there any one thing that you feel has given you the ability to have the success you have currently, or any characteristics you've built that have a big impact?
Yeah. Actually, just for answer, I was just going to think. I just feel, because I've been shouting out all these other poker stables, but also obviously the Poker Ambition stable. I had a lot of respect for over the years, and Kempy, he is one of my biggest enemies for so long. I just can't beat this guy, and he's obviously a product of you guys. So loads of respect for that, and obviously what you guys do with the podcast as well. It's like really cool, I think, and definitely like keeps it kind of real, showing people what like the game's really like, which I think is important.
I heard you can now confirm this, but I remember I heard that you guys labeled us the Dutch Innovation Crew. True or false?
What's that? Yeah, I mean, there's been lots of names for the Dutch crew over the years, but
I like that one, the Dutch Innovation Crew. I liked it.
Yeah, no, we've always had like always been fun to turn up the table and see what Poker Kluk has cooked up or whatever, or like Kempy's been like a prime enemy of our house over the years as well. Just constantly losing stacks. He'll be like, come up with like, how many stacks did you lose to Brian today, mate? Oh yeah, just another 5. But yeah, definitely a lot of like amazing players that have come out of that. But yeah, back to the question was what? Sorry, can you? I got lost now with my praise for Poker Ambition. What was the question again?
The question was, what do you think has been the greatest or one of the greatest contributors to your success over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I would always credit like a lot of my success to luck. You know, like I said, like I obviously ran very well when I started, and then like got into Skype groups with the people that mattered and like made my career go the way it goes. So I wouldn't understate that. I would say in general, though, this like self-awareness, again, it's a word I keep saying, but I think it helped me a lot. And like, yeah, just kind of like being able to realize maybe a bit too late at times, like when I was okay to make a step up. And then more recently as well, being able to realize that when it was time to like maybe stop playing these games where I was constantly losing. And then finally, just like the community, like BitB, obviously we made with the aim of like making some more money. But like I've realized over the years, like just this community is so valuable for me, even for me as a coach, you know, like having like all these guys around to bounce ideas off. Like some of the students are so good at poker now. Like when people finish contracts at BitB, they tend to stay in the group in like a various form. And like, yeah, some of the students like randomly shouting out like Jacob Yusuf and Med, who obviously coaches for us as well now. They're like El Poncheslaw, like even like some of the guys who started 100 NL, but like they show up to the study sessions and they kind of like actively help you as well. And just it just makes poker more fun being around these people, which I think is the main thing, makes it much less of a grind, like having like a big community of people to be involved with.
Awesome, very good stuff. Yeah, as you were speaking there, I was trying to guess myself what you're going to say. I was just writing down self-awareness as you said it, and I think self-awareness is definitely a big one for you in terms of knowing how to navigate the poker world based on your own characteristics. So we've got someone like yourself who's quite risk averse, like security. You've got to pick a career path in poker that allows you to function with those kind of attributes. Obviously, you could say, okay, I could become a more risk tolerant person, but in general, someone who's risk averse is going to carry that to some degree with them. So for you to play stakes, to basically take on less risk, you never went broke, which is, I think, was a Goose Call who was saying, like, when we spoke with him, that he was, all his German friends used to say, you're the only guy in our stable who won't go broke, because like basically your risk tolerance and the decision you make align with that. So it's one of those things that when you know yourself well enough, I'm sure your friends, I'm sure over the years, you've had lots of players around you going, go on, take more risk, go on, play those games. Sometimes it might work out and sometimes the push is what you need, but often like knowing yourself well enough to go, right, this is where we need to be, this is where I make money, I don't need to play those high games. You spoke like recently that this year you were playing some of the nosebleed games, like 10K plus, and you decided to go back to playing your current games. So we'll touch on that in a second. But yeah, I think having the self-awareness to know where do you fit, where do you make the most money, and yeah, building your kind of career path around that. You guys also talked about like some players who will sit in a kind of a really hard lineup with Linus, etc. Those kind of guys might be picking a good path for themselves. They might be more curious about learning, improving. Their win rates might be lower, but they might have a relationship with the game where they just want to learn the best strategies and also challenge themselves against good opponents. So I think the self-awareness is really, really key for this, because if you get that assessment wrong, like you said, if you're the guy trying to battle everyone, the best players in the world, and you've got assessment wrong, high variance approach, but also like, if it's not a fit for your character, you're not the person who deals well with these big swings, this big uncertainty, you're going to come unstuck. So yeah, I think that's a real big one. So yeah, you talked about playing the nosebleeds this year. First of all, what made you decide that wasn't a fit for you? Or do you feel like that's just a short-term thing? Yeah, talk me through like how that chapter went and what was kind of the takeaway you had from playing those games.
Yeah, I think like, so I guess like last year, middle of last year, I started playing some 10K games. And I was like, first of all, selling, and I took my own action at 10K. And then I had like an opportunity to play the even higher stakes games and just basically treat it as the same stakes for me. So I was like more volume. And in general, I would say I was looking at these games, and I still kind of believe this, like when they run with recreational players, they actually tend to be softer than 10K and 5K. Maybe not quite the case anymore, because like a lot of people have come back and a lot of like the good players have moved up as well. But for a long time, it was like to play 40K, for example, or 100K, the extreme example. I think I played like 50 hands of 100K lifetime, so I can't really comment on that one. But 40K and 20K where I played a bit more, it's like not necessarily a meritocracy anymore. It's not like the best players play there, because no one is really rolled for these stakes. Well, at least they weren't before the big crypto upswing. So anyone who's playing there is just either playing kind of a bit degenerately or selling a lot of action. Or there are some people that roll, so it's not really fair to say that. But a lot of like old time regs come back who are like nowhere near as strong as like the kind of O-Spiels, who's like the trademark kind of 5K player who's like very, very elite but might not play the biggest games for a while. So yeah, the games were like definitely objectively good, and I still believe that I didn't really play any games I was losing in. So yeah, I was like, I'll play them. But then what happened was I started to run not great, I would say. I think I lost like 27 buy-ins or something at 10K plus. So it's not like a bad downswing at all. It's like a normal downswing. But when you start, and like this is the biggest problem really, is like when you lose 27 buy-ins, and it's like, and for me, it wasn't even much money because I sold so much action, but I couldn't get away from the anchoring of like how much money it was in real terms. And it's such a normal downswing to have. This is the other problem, that like having an emotional reaction to a normal downswing is like somewhat problematic for me, because I've gone through my whole career without like having this problem. Well, that's not true. Obviously, every time I lose 20 buy-ins, it's not like I'm like jumping around with happiness, but I can deal with it. I know it's part of the game. And I think my friend, like my housemate Frank, was good with this as well, because I had like one day I lost like 50K or something at 10K. And I was like moaning a bit about him to it, and he was like, hey, "You're playing 10K now, mate. Like you're gonna obviously lose 50K." Like, and as brutal as it sounds, it's what you need to hear, because you have to remember, like, you can't play these games and like like obviously there's like a honeymoon period, which always comes with playing new stakes. But if you feel like elation on winning a stack and like despair on losing a stack, you can't play good poker. And like, I think the goal for me, like, again, I think I was winning all the time I was playing. And like, if anything, my plays were a bit too risk averse. I think I remember one like unbelievable 200 big blind bluff against Br0 where it was like a Pio line. I would like to say it's like a line which Pio likes, but in practice it's just minus 20k or whatever. But yeah, I just was like feeling way too much emotion with the daily swings, and then also had like I had like a big shoulder injury this year and like breakup and stuff, and I was like, it's just sensible to take a step back. But again, it's the community helps a lot because you're so involved with your ego at this point where you're like, look, like I'm sure I'm better than these players, like than some of these players at least, and like some of these players have these insane results at nosebleeds. Like I want this to be me. Like you get like I want the fame and stuff to some extent. It's never been that important, but it's just nice to think that people think like, oh yeah, like it's cool that this guy like came from small stakes to play in nosebleeds. And then obviously it went badly and I was like, oh, how is this fair? But with my house, I think my housemates were very good at this as well. They're like, look, like we do think you're playing these games, like we would take your action if you kept playing. Actually wasn't, I was a 7 action to someone else, not them. They're like, we would take your action, but at the same time, like emotionally and for like happiness, I'm not sure it's the best path for you. And like, I think it's sensible to take a step back for a while. So yeah, I was kind of in this stage where I was like winning. My overall win rate this year has been like 3 big blind compared to 5 big blind plus previous years, so a bit worse. And then because of the bad run of 40k and 20k for a while, it was like quite a big hole, which wasn't like having any effect at all on my life. But yeah, just emotionally, it makes playing poker so much harder if you care what happens hand to hand, I think. And yeah, I would like to think I'll be back, but just for now, I thought it was sensible to move down a bit.
Can I ask you a question here? I wanted to hop in real quick. Sorry, Adam. I wrote down a question around this topic that, you know, in general, it's obviously hard to lose a lot. But I found that after I started to coach and became a bit more of a public figure, so to speak, right? More out there. I personally found it handling losses are way more difficult than if you're not a coach that people sort of look up to. Like if I don't have my shit together and if I'm not performing well, the last thing I want to do is explain other people how to do it. If you understand what I mean, I suffer from very big imposter syndrome. Do you experience anything similar?
Yeah, I definitely had these exact feelings really, where I feel like because I've always been also quite publicly outspoken, where I've said like publicly before that I don't think people who don't play should necessarily be like coaching people who do play high stakes, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I would like publicly like say that like I think someone who's like I think and even this year it's kind of heightened my feeling of this, that you have to be in the arena at least to some extent to understand like what works in the arena, and like commenting from an outsider is difficult. So then when it comes like you're in the arena and you're just getting hammered, and then you're like, oh yeah, like I'm coaching all these guys, I'm telling them like these are the best strategies to play, but then like outwardly your results look so bad because you lost so much when you were playing. It does make you feel a bit like I definitely had sometimes where I felt a bit like a fraud in these circumstances, and I think it's just like I said, 27 binds is whatever, it's variance. And like objectively, I don't think I played too badly in these samples. There were some problems I played badly, but there was definitely a dose of humble pie in there, where like players who I would like say I thought were like not playing so well because of X, Y, and Z, started to like do so well over bigger samples that you couldn't really deny that you were wrong anymore. And again, it's just like the whole progression of learning in poker, I think, is just realizing that like how careful you have to be to trust your own judgment when there's so much variance involved. And yeah, definitely taking lessons from that and learn a lot from that stretch in that way. But yeah, the imposter syndrome is definitely something I can relate with.
Adam, help us.
Yeah, I can see the issue. So you've got like, first of all, your own results that you care about a lot and trying to win. And often we care more about other people than we do ourselves in a lot of scenarios. When you've got like a coaching group, you've got friends and peers who believe in you. You've got people who you're helping on their journeys and they look up to you. All of a sudden, like when your results start to shake a bit, you're like, oh shit, like I'm meant to be helping these guys. And I'm the one who from the outside looks like I haven't got my shit together. I think like the main thing to take away is very often like in both your scenarios, like your students aren't going to think less of you regardless of your results. In your head, you'll be like, oh, I'm losing this stake. My students are going to be like, I'm a loser, I'm an idiot. Very often, like, they have a lot of respect for you. They're going to continue to have a lot of respect for you. You're constantly giving them value in many, many ways. And they're probably more aware than you are how much variance is playing in your kind of results day to day. So sometimes we get so zoomed into our own situation and we think everyone else around us is like kind of as zoomed in on us as we are. And we just be able to drop that. It's a hard thing because obviously, like, you do want to have good results, and like George was saying, like, you don't want to feel like an imposter. You want to be in the arena getting good results, showing your students, look what I'm doing, you copy me. Like, you want to lead by example, but sometimes in poker that's just not possible. You can't just be the guy who gets the good results all the time, especially in the short term, and you got to be able to live with that. So yeah, I think it's a battle to face, and you guys both have to kind of come to terms with that. And almost like lowering that performance pressure and realize that the people who look up to you, your students, the people in your peer group, will continue to look up to you, will continue to respect you. It's just you. Like, that's like changing your opinion of yourself. And it's that coming to terms with that more than anything.
Yeah. I think like the other thing that helps me a lot is with BitB, and like we all play the same, basically. Like we have the same ideas about the game and play very similarly. Obviously, like Daryl executes better than me, but like at least we're thinking on the same lines, and like you see that, like, you just get a bigger sample on like your strategy, and you see like the students are still crushing, like your friends are still crushing. There's no possible way that you can be like not crushing when they're looking at your hands and saying, I would have played the same, and they think about the game the exact same, which definitely helps. But there was another tangent I was going to go on as well here, which is just to add, like, it just every year I kind of realize more and more like how impossible it is to appreciate variance for what it is, where like I spend so much of my life trying to think about like how bad variance can be and how you can deal with it when it happens. But a good example is like last year, at the end of last year, I was running really, really well. I had like over 500,000 in winnings, and I was like feeling like the God complex, just so to speak, and like starting to like really believe I was good. And another coach was like running really bad this time, and I knew he was running bad, like, because of all the things I've talked about. But at the same time, my subconscious couldn't help but start to think like, I'm just better than him. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I was aware of this happening. And I was like, yeah, like, it's like I could see it was flawed, but at the same time, it still starts to kind of seep into how you believe things, because humans just are wired to look at what happens and be like, this happens for a reason. So yeah, just every year, like I said, I just realize more and more how hard it is to fight this. Kind of.
Yeah, it's almost like the unwinnable battle to fight variance. Variance is like the god of uncertainty, and he's always there, and he's ruling everything, and you try to pin him down and go, right, I'm going to create some certainty here, I'm going to create some security here, and he's just laughing at the whole game going, uncertainty, let's get with it. And you're trying to outsmart him. You think, I've got a point now where I'm going to get one over on him. It's almost like playing like Linus and thinking you're outsmarting him and exploiting him, and he's just starts, I got you here. See, I think it's one of those things that's really variance is just like the most kind of beautiful thing about poker, but also the most challenging. And it does like create so much turmoil, because I think especially for players like yourself, George, who like certainty, you like that security, you like knowing what's going to happen, you like being able to predict your win rate and player pools and what's going to happen kind of results wise. And like variance just kind of doesn't allow for that. And the more like you go into bigger games and less sample sizes, the more variance gets magnified, the more you have to come to terms with, wait a second, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to win. And can you be okay not knowing? Now, this is like a real tough one for poker players, because literally your whole identity is built on solving problems, being smart, knowing answers. And then with variance, you've got to say, I don't know what's going to come next. I can't plan for this. Anything can happen in the short term. Can I breathe through that? Can I be okay with it? And it's in different scenarios, it becomes more and more challenging. So I think it's ongoing work. I think it's almost like every level you go in poker, you've got to relearn the variance, how variance interplays. But I like your self-awareness as well to acknowledge that even though everyone around you is telling you you're playing great, even though you could sell your action to limit your kind of exposure, you still felt like, I'm too emotionally attached to these buy-ins. All right, so not the money itself is like, okay, 27 buy-ins. You almost like trying to calibrate your emotional response in kind of real time and go, this emotional response I'm having isn't calibrated to those 27 buy-ins. I'm getting too attached to the money part of it. Probably a good time to back off and not push through that, even though the people around you might want you to. See, again, it comes down to knowing yourself well. I'm sure you'll rebuild, you'll get more confidence, you'll get more clarity and confidence that you can get throughout your career, and you'll play those games with a higher degree of certainty, and the risk will feel a lot less. But at the same time, it's like knowing where you are now and being able to back away at the right times.
Yeah. The only advice I guess the thing I've learned this year about these games as well, and like we discuss this a lot in our house, because like obviously Daryl and Marcus always in these like 40k games when they're running, 100k games when they're running, and I think you just have to really understand that like you will not get a sample in these games. Like that, there's no way you'll ever like like play enough of these games to reach the long run because they just don't run enough. And this is something you have to come to terms with. And if you're going to play them, you have to like accept that like you're making an extremely plus EV decision because it's extremely high stakes, and like I said, the players aren't necessarily as good as a lower stakes, but you're making an extremely plus EV decision with a ton of variance around it. And like if you're happy with that, you live with the outcome of the decision as well. And I think I was like, for me, like I said, I was so nitty with silent action anyway. It wasn't really high stakes. But even with that in mind, I think like I thought I was happy with the decision, but then when like shit hit the fan and like it really like started going badly, I mentally wasn't, because like once poker starts to seep into your life and like your feeling is like dictated on how well the day went, it's not for me. I think some people can live with it, but for me, I like want to like not have like a dark cloud on losing days and bright sunlight on winning days at least.
Yeah, you saw the warning signs. You saw poker, your mood being affected by the day-to-day swings. And yeah, very interesting how you talk about that in terms of, because when I think about variance, I always like think the positive kind of mindset with it is variance will kind of even out of the long run, or at least for your mind, you want to convince your mind that variance isn't against you. And you play enough of a sample of your career that it'll be somewhat in the realm of kind of running true. But playing these high games, going in there with the pretense of this variance is going to play a huge role. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't play enough volume to get past that variance. So I'm in the hands of the gods right now in terms of what's going to happen in this shot take. It's super high stakes, so it could impact my year or a few years if I run really bad. Go deal with that. Like it's really challenging because it makes you it really throws you into that uncertain environment where there's almost nothing to hold on to. It is like a very kind of volatile place where obviously things go well. You look back and go, oh yeah, I'm glad I did it, but obviously it's good for yourself to recalibrate and go, wait a second, do I want to be in this environment? And also, is the emotional response I'm getting something I want to keep dealing with? So yeah, it's a very, very interesting situation.
Yeah.
All right. So final question from me, looking back on your career, if you could give yourself one piece of advice when you were stuck, let's say mid stakes, I think you were there for like 3 years at one point playing like a kind of 200 kind of level, what one piece of advice would you give yourself that you've learned since then that would fast track your progress?
Yeah, it's tough, but like I always think like the obvious thing to say is like don't do the corporate job, but then like it's kind of the butterfly effect problem. You're like, if I didn't do this, maybe I would never have the drive, because I worked so hard for a couple of after I quit this job, because I had the motivation to be like, I have to make it count. So like I struggle with that. And then the other thing I always think about is like I stressed a lot through my life, like worrying about like whether it would be all right, like whether like I'd like be okay financially, whatever, like whether my like goals would come to fruition. And like obviously I'm 29 now, and I'm like in a spot where like when I was 22 I'd have been extremely happy with, or when I was 16 or whatever. But there was so much stress like through the journey that like I would kind of like to have known it would be all right. But then saying this is butterfly effect again, because like maybe if everything's going to turn out all right, you like lose the fire, and like as cliche as it is, the journey is like the fun. Do you know what I mean? It's like you don't want to like you don't want to know that everything's going to be okay. It's like part of the fun is like you're working hard, hoping that like it pays off in the long run, and like the climb is like the funnest part. Like you always hear stories about people reach their goals and they're like, what next? So yeah, I haven't really given an answer then. What advice would I give myself? I would like to have known earlier on in my career that like not to stop copying the solvers, basically. So look, I maybe like look at your opponents would have been a good piece of advice for me early on in my career, I think, which wouldn't have had too many downsides. I
like that. I think as often with advice, like you said, sometimes we've got to learn the lessons the hard way, and going through the struggles is part of the process we need to go through. But other times, like one little snippet of advice that we could have learned a bit earlier, which is like fast track us, like 12 months or 6 months that we were kind of around the edges, but like a bit off track. So I think always like through life, as you get wiser and wiser, you can kind of look back on parts of your life. If I knew that little part, that would have been a kind of cheat sheet for me to get further. Yeah, it was interesting what you're saying, basically like how much you worried about throughout your career. And I think it's very interesting to think about like how much the worry was needed. So one element, like worry is going to get you to try harder, to put time into your game, to really think about the problems and try to solve them. So there's an element like worry will play a positive role, but on the other side, it's like there's going to be lots of negatives on your mood, your ability to be creative, your ability to play your best poker. And it's like, was the worry needed? Did you succeed because of the money? That was a cause relationship, or was it in spite of it? If we remove that worry, would that have freed you to play even better poker? Obviously, no clue, but I think it's really interesting to go, which of the kind of things that I used to fuel me to go forward, which of those helped me that I really needed them, and which ones I could have dropped. So for example, I always think like life is a big journey. So as you know, the process to get somewhere. But if we like struggle through life to get to an outcome, very often we're like, did I need to struggle? And not struggle as in like working hard and doing the stuff, but did my relationship with what I had to do had to be negative? Could I not have enjoyed the process of figuring that out a bit more? Could I have almost like smell the roses, so to speak, on that journey a little bit more? And almost always the answer is yes, to some degree. And like for you, like in terms of not worrying as much, maybe like not knowing that things are going to work out, but like a belief like somewhere implanted into your brain that I'm going to find a way to figure this out. I can worry, but not too much, because I'm the kind of person who's going to find my way through all this kind of fog and all this stuff that's going on. I'll find a way. Maybe like something like that would have helped to alleviate the worry, just to make the journey itself more enjoyable. It might have led you to the same place. The worry might have been actually a factor that helped you. But yeah, I think it's always good to look back and go, right, how can I take some lessons from this that maybe will help me, or I can relate to someone else to help them?
Yeah. I struggle a lot with this still, because I kind of agree with you, like self-belief would have helped a lot, but then the problem is that I still have with this is I'm like, yeah, maybe it would have been better if I believed in myself a lot earlier on. That would like reduce some of the stress. Not that I didn't enjoy, obviously, the climb, because the climb, which is still ongoing, because I do find it enjoyable day in, day out. But then the problem I have as well is I'm like, look, I am where I am today, and like it's not necessarily inevitable that I'd make it here, if that makes sense. So if I like draw the conclusion like, oh yeah, I made it to high stakes, I'm like friends with all these guys, therefore like from this I can take confidence that I believe I can do anything. But it's like there's obviously like, who knows, like maybe I like ran like top 1% to get here and stuff like this. So I try and like still be objective, or like realistically it's quite likely that I'm like a survivor to some extent of like a lot of unforeseen timelines which didn't come to fruition, and then not like believe too much in my own success as like as a justification for other things. Because I do see a lot in poker players sometimes where they take their success in poker and believe that they can be successful in like X other field which is unrelated to poker, and normally I would say on average they're more likely to be wrong, even though poker players do have a lot of very good transferable skills. It's just it's the God complex again, I guess. Like so yeah, it's a really tough balance though, yeah, because like I said, I think the ultimate thing that you should strive for is your life satisfaction, like how well you feel about yourself every day. And I definitely haven't got that right all the time, and I probably got it right in the direction that you say, where like I've been like more worried than I should have been, but then want to balance it by not believing too much in my own myth, so to speak, or whatever.
Yeah, it's very interesting that what you're talking about, basically like getting overconfidence that you're good at one thing and trying to apply that to other things. I had a conversation with some of my friends probably last week actually, and we were talking about this, where people get into ventures and they have a high degree of confidence, even though they haven't got the expertise to back it up. It's like almost like you've been researching something, then you make like a big risky investment, and they're like, "Well, like you're the fish in this avenue. Like, do you not know like the expertise?" I think somebody's poker, like especially when you like play for a long time, you realize in this niche format at this particular time, I have edge. If you take me out of that and put me somewhere else, I'm a fish. Like it's almost all over the world. So it's like knowing your lane, knowing where your expertise are good, and not misapplying those. Because obviously, if you're good at poker, yes, you're smart, but you put you into a different field, the chances of you instantly being outsmarted than other people in that field is very, very low. So I think it's a thing that poker players who are branching out of poker need to be aware of. On the flip side, I think if you make your success in poker, there's a very good chance you've learned enough attributes, enough self-awareness, so to speak, as we've been talking about, that you've great enough character traits that if you acquire skills in a different area, you have enough like kind of soft skills to be able to make it work. Like say going into starting your own business, you can tolerate risk, you can be your own boss, you can be productive, you know how to learn. There's a very good chance that you can pick something up, but at the same time, it's still risk. So I think it's a double-edged sword that you can
balance.
To balance. Yeah, to balance.
And I think as well, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, like, I think as well as the stakes you're playing, because obviously poker lets you have the capital that you can go into whatever new field and like instantly play high stakes. So like you jump into like, yeah, you can A, believe in yourself too much because poker went well for you, and then B, instantly jump into tough games. But yeah, I agree with you. I think the skill set's transferable. It's just important to figure out what game you're playing. Like you don't want to like open up an e-commerce platform to rival against Amazon, because that's like sitting Linus heads up. But like if you're playing like, if you're taking over a shipping business in Amsterdam, playing against like the 2-L regs who've just been there all years because they've got a ring fence site, then yeah, sure, your skills are going to transfer more profitably.
Such a good analogy. What game are you playing and what's the competition? It's very good to like always be aware of that. And yeah, like you said, poker players who are very good financially, got a good bankroll, they might jump into a very high stakes game that they're not skilled in. It's very, very good to think about, the games you're playing in the competition relative to the skill level you have at the time. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in terms of every life path, but it's so true. It's such a true equation to think about. All right, Rene, have you got any questions that you want to ask George?
Yeah, I think another important skill that you learn through poker is the ability to analyze and improve. So whatever venture you decide to hop in, you probably have developed the skill of continuous improvement. So you know how to put something in practice. You're automatically analytical. So you're always trying to look at, okay, how can I improve this? How can I improve that? You probably relate to this, George, also like in other areas of your life. Just a part of your brain that automatically turns on. It's like you automatically analyze and you look for, hey, how can this be better? How can this be improved? So I think that really helps. I think if you learned how to get better in something, in this case, poker, the skills are very transmittable to other areas as well. So I think that really helps. Yeah, I have a couple of final questions, and then I think we should let George go. As Adam likes to say, be respectful of George's time. I have a couple more questions that I wrote down that I want to touch on that we didn't get to. At some point, you mentioned that 1K&L players still make a lot of mistakes there compared to elite level or to Pio. I think you mentioned both. What, in your opinion, sets elite apart from 1K&L, for example, where people are already playing really good poker?
Yeah. All right. I think so. Like, we can start by like quantifying elite, I guess. Like, because there's a line between like I meant to even say at the start of the podcast, I wouldn't classify myself as like an elite player. Like I'm not going to sit down in these nosebleed battles and expect to win. But I would also think that I'm better than the average 1K&L regular. Obviously partly because of the environment I got into. But yeah, so there's like the difference between like an average 1K player and myself, hopefully at least, and then the difference between myself and like the guys who I think are the best of the best, like say Davy Jones, Ospiel, Daryl, etc. Obviously Linus, Marcus. So I think like so much of it is this kind of crystallization of where EV is generated, where like I think the really good players, they're like looking to win. Do you know what I mean? They're like sat there and they're being like, how can I generate big blinds to myself in this game? How can I generate win rate for myself? Whereas average 1K player is either much more passively trying to implement his chosen game plan, where he's like trying to copy the output without necessarily understanding well enough where it generates EV to be able to deviate well against different opponents. Or there's a lot of 1K players nowadays who are like more kind of protocol based, where maybe they follow like a game plan which is by default exploitative, but they're not capable of like they don't understand well enough like the nuances of where to move away from that. So you've got the two sides of the spectrum. You've got like the kind of the copiers, well, they're both copiers in a different way, I guess. Whereas the higher stakes players are much more like crystallizing their vision, so they're going to be playing completely differently against different players, and then their like baseline understanding of equilibrium is going to be better. So like their understanding of their own strategy is going to be stronger to start with, and then the deviations they make against weaker players are going to be bigger as well. So overall, it just generates more EV. Like if they run into a very strong player, they play very strongly themselves, so they don't lose much EV to them. And if they play against a very weak player, they play they transfer much higher EV to them. So that's how I would qualify it, I guess.
I think it's a very, very, very good answer, to be honest. Very good answer. I think also it's natural that when you start to play higher stakes, the pool becomes smaller. So it's natural that you start to focus a bit more on single opponents instead of pools, or just focus on your own strategy, right? From playing from equilibrium. So I think it's also kind of the environment that kind of triggers that as well, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you cannot study all your opponents if you're playing 500 NL, right? It's way better to study general pool trends and kind of label, okay, here's the pool, you fall a bit on the right spectrum of the pool, you fall a bit on the left spectrum of the pool, you know, and obviously you can use like maybe certain HUD stats that are particular to how you would deviate a certain strategy. Let's say, for example, proping stats, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely agree with you. It becomes way more important to know your opponents when you play high stakes. Also, just because like when you're playing a random 1K table, it's quite unlikely you're playing that one of the regs on the table is like really destroying you for win rate. Whereas if you start playing 5K and you're like, all right, this game's good because I'm a professional poker player, there's a recreational player, then you've got like, I keep using Davy Jones as an example because he's my current favorite player to say is the end boss, but you've got him at your table. Like, you have to realize this is a seat which is actively taking EV away from you, rather than just being like, it's 5 regs and a fish and we're chopping up the fish's money. It's like, all right, now I've got a fish, I've got 4 regs, and I've got a reg who's kind of making me into a bit of a fish. So I think it's like a different game for that reason too. The other thing I was going to add actually as well is that there are just like, there's a lot of different kind of poker players. Like, lots of people have been playing poker for a long time, developed a lot of capital, and nowadays they just show up and like they play games with recreational players, and they're like not really bothered about too much other than like trying to slowly siphon money away from the fish and play like okay against the rest of the regulars. And these players show up at like these guys play 1K, they play high stakes as well, and they're like very good, respectable players in their own right, but they're at the same time they're just not going to fight in the same way, or like they're going to have all the human leaks because they didn't really work hard to become subhuman. Wait, that's the wrong word. To become
cyborg.
yeah, they didn't really work hard to fight their leaks, and they don't really have a reason to because they developed like capital base, and they're just trying to like make their nice yearly winnings now. So yeah, it's like these guys are different to someone like coming up the stakes, I think, as well.
I think that's good advice. One thing that we asked you, or like highlights of your career, you mentioned a couple of things, but one thing I thought was very beautiful, which was that you mentioned that actually other people's success stood out for you. That was kind of like seeing other people succeed. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I thought a lot when you asked this question. I thought it was a good question because I thought about it and I was like, since I started playing professionally again, I don't think there's been like an actual moment, day, or session where I've been like, wow, like what a highlight that was. Mostly because I've been fighting quite a lot to like not be results oriented, I guess. But all along, I felt a long time I'm much better at coaching than playing poker. I think possibly just because of what we talked about with the mental game side, like my risk aversion is like so far on one side naturally that no matter how much I've improved it over the years and how hard I'm going to fight it, I'm always going to struggle to execute as well as other people do, and hopefully improving that year on year and getting better and better. But coaching, that's not so much of a problem. And like, I don't know how much I can attribute people's success to me, but like a lot of my students have had a lot of success for years, like beyond what I've had, for example. And I think I wrote the thing is with cash as well, it's all one grind, so you don't really get as much of like a highlight session as you do in tournaments. So it is the tournament results that really stand out to me, where like the nicest one recently was when Linus and Sam Grafton were heads up in the Trident. And obviously I can't claim to have coached Linus at all, but obviously he's a close friend of mine, and we all had a piece in our house, so it was like a sick sweat to watch him like playing this 100K heads up and like watch it, like cheering every knockout. But Sam and me worked together a lot through the years, just because he was like a very strong tournament player, but wanted more like understanding of how to play deeper and not hemorrhage money basically to the better players in these high rollers. And then he had like obviously this insane score in this field, and he sent me like a really nice voice message afterwards. And it's like such a subtle little thing. But for me, it was like a real kind of like highlight moment, because I already had a really good feeling, obviously, because Linus did so well. And then when like Sam actually beat Linus heads up, and when he sent me this message, it's like, yeah, just kind of nice to see that he appreciated it. I'm not sure how much I can claim credit for, because obviously he was very, very good anyway, and so much of the tournaments is not the stage which we were studying. But yeah, I had a really, really probably amongst my like definitely my happiest days in poker this day, I would say.
Nice. Yeah, I can definitely relate with that. Like, I receive messages. For example, also just with making content or this podcast, I receive a random message of Discord, someone I've never known. Hey man, you really helped a lot with the podcast, amazing stuff. Yeah, you know, these kind of things are really, really nice to hear. Same with students who contribute, you know, at least a part of their success to you. I think, you know, it's like in the hierarchy pyramid of needs, right? At some point is contribution to others. It's naturally kind of the next step. You reach a certain success yourself, then you feel the need to contribute. Talking about like success and being satisfied, you mentioned that the end goal in life is not to be good in poker, but to be good in life. So in terms of looking forward, what are your goals and how do you define being good in life?
Yeah, and like what you, related to this, what you said about contributing to others, I think resonates a lot with me, because it is dubious in poker whether you're like contributing well to the world or whatever. And like when I went to consulting as a part of what I thought, I was like, now I can go and do like use my skills, my intellect to do some good in the world, maybe, possibly. But when I was in the corporate world, obviously I was like, it's not really true. What I'm doing isn't necessarily better than poker. But then when you look on a more micro scale, like making differences in people's lives that you can do through coaching or like through poker itself, it is just a nice feeling. And I think like the world's so complex that this is like a noble goal to aspire to, I guess, to be like be able to like make a small difference to a small amount of people who like you can really say it's true that you did make their life better. So yeah, links to part of what I want to aspire to in poker. I guess I just like playing poker still. Like I really enjoy it, so I want to keep playing and hopefully keep enjoying it. Like I would like to say I'll be back in these like nosebleed games at some point, but at the very least like maintain like my status as kind of a 5k 2k regular, and like maintain good results there, and like keep like running BitB and like bringing through different people through there and like expanding the community there, and like keep having good results. And I think like poker has a lot of time. Like obviously I've told you before, I thought poker was done when I was 22 years old, 7 years ago. But I think there's like a lot of life yet left in the game. Like maybe it just carries on endlessly, honestly, given what I see. Like more positive regulation coming with America and stuff, like massive new markets opening out, sites actually starting to care a bit more about game integrity. And then worst case scenario, like I used to think if you play against a bot, you lose your entire bankroll in minutes, but it's just not true. Like bots don't really win that much money against elite players anyway. So yeah, I think a lot of reasons to be hopeful where like maybe there wasn't, maybe in the past I just misperceived what was going on. So yeah, I would quite like to still be playing poker and continue playing poker, like good volume over the next few years, and just hopefully keep enjoying it as well.
What do you think going forward is the biggest threat in terms of you trying to achieve your goals? Something that you have to be on the lookout for?
It's a tough question. Sleeping, I guess, because the problem is in Austria, you've got to play poker at ridiculous hours. If you're very good, you can play the morning schedule, but if you want to have a nicer grind, you have to play in the evenings. So yeah, depend. Maybe one time I get sick of going to bed at 2 a.m. because I'm more of a morning person generally. But that's a cop-out answer. I'm not sure really. I kind of believe that with the spot I'm in now, I'm obviously so lucky with the house I'm in. That like assuming nothing extraneous, is that the word? External. If nothing external happens, things would go well. I think the one thing I worry about a bit is regulation. I'm like worried that like, because so much of poker now is ACR and GG, like who knows what's going on legally there. Like, and then there's like the crypto risk as well, where like all the sites are crypto based. Like, there's obviously tough to know like how exposed they themselves are to crypto. So assuming that nothing bad happens with like the poker websites, I would feel like I'm in a pretty good place and nothing terrible happens to me or my family. But yeah.
All right. You have any final questions for George, Adam?
No, I think we've left it at a good stage. But I want to thank George for his time, been a great guest. And yeah, we've picked your brain apart here. Hopefully the audience have enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And yeah, it's been really, really enjoyable.
Any last thing you would like to say, George?
No, thanks guys. It was an absolute pleasure to be on. And really enjoyed it. 3 hours, I think, has gone by and it's absolutely flown by. So yeah, and keep putting the podcast out as well, because I enjoy watching them as well.
So normally this is the moment where I say, what a great episode. But this time, It was an absolutely great episode. Don't you think, Adam?
I agree. It was an amazing conversation. Lots of good takeaways hopefully for the audience. Some of the main themes that were coming out for me throughout the conversation were George's self-awareness, his ability to almost like seek certainty in situations so that he can have more confidence and more clarity. He almost like classified himself as quite risk averse, someone who likes safety and security, yet he's been able to play a super high stakes poker throughout his career. And it's been because he's known himself well enough. He's known when to push forward. He's known when to back off. He's known when to play with a high amount of variance for his bankroll relative to kind of other players. But he's always had this self-awareness to be able to check in with himself and know where he's at, which has been a huge skill. Also, community. He's talked about all the players he's been around, some of the legends of the online game right now. He's been living with, being partnered with, being friends with, being around them in their environments. And all of these help shape him. I think he said they've shaped him into the player he is. But also, like, I think when you're around good players like that, you're often given a lot to the table. I think George spoke a lot about he's kind of a giving person, likes to coach others, like help others. And the reason he's around really high-level people is because he's a high-level person himself, and they gain a lot from being around him. So I think often when we think of being in a good community, you need to realize you've got to be a giver in those communities as well to thrive, which he obviously is. I really like the analogy of building scar tissue. That just resonates so strongly with me, and the visuals really clear in terms of going through adversity. It makes you tougher. All right. So building resilience, building mental toughness. He talked about, first of all, his swimming career, how that made him a bit tougher in pain thresholds. And then he talked about going through downswings, break-even patches, where he had to reflect. And each one of those events was scar tissue, building scar tissue so he could come back stronger next time. So yeah, amazing takeaways. I think George was a great guest. What were some of the things that you wrote down for your main points, Rene?
I focus a bit more on the technical. I try to not interfere too much with the mental game. What I wrote down is the difference that he mentioned between average players and elite. That the elite are very much focused on winning, where the average are more focusing on not to lose, right? In general, I think we talked about this actually in the Berkey episode as well. GTO plays from a frame of, okay, I play solid, so I cannot lose. It's a bit defensive, whereas exploitive, you're looking more for weaknesses of your opponent and trying to attack to gain more win rate than you should, right? You're taking EV from them, as I think George mentioned many times. And he really talked about the difference. Obviously, he also said that if they need to play defensive because they play against a very strong player, their fundamental knowledge of the game and how they can play close to equilibrium is still very high. But then once an exploit opens up, or let's say, for example, they play versus a recreational who has a lot of leaks, they tend to be way better in deviating from their game plan and make the correct exploit to make way more money. I thought this was a great explanation of the difference between average and elite players. One thing that I think he highlighted is that there's many ways you can be successful in poker. I think he said, okay, this guy, maybe from a strategic perspective, I think he has a lot of leaks, but he every time is the biggest winner at the end of the year because he's always there. He plays all the volume. And, maybe the things that I think our leaks are maybe not really hurting his bottom line that much, right? He also talked about where the money actually comes from. Well, in that case, probably within his strategy, the leaks were not probably costing him a lot of money, and he was maybe playing always in good games. He was always there making the volume. So I thought those were really important points as well. He was talking about to be the practitioner and not the theory professor. I think that was also his main takeaway for himself, right? If he could give advice to himself, get out of the theory world and start thinking about in practice. I think we should really think about how theory applies in the real game and not copy the solver, right? A solver is just a GTO model. It's a toy game we can learn from. We can learn certain concepts from that, but we should always think about how does this translate into practice. And this is also something that I think good players, do better than the average players. And the last point I wrote down is how to stay more consistent during variance. So if it goes very well, he talked about having the gut syndrome. And if it goes very bad, you feel like the worst player in the world. I think, if you can reduce those swings, obviously no one is immune to that, but working on ways how to better deal with the adversity in poker, I think that was one of the key the key aspects that he saw, I think, in students who succeeded, they were able to deal with variance a little bit better. So they stayed consistent in maybe their studying time. They stayed consistent in executing the strategy they knew was good throughout ups and downs. Okay, so they were not deviated from their strategy. Another point that I then added was the financial pressure. This is definitely something that you should try to not get yourself into. This sounds very obvious, but people are not really conscious about like their bankroll management, the amount of money they spend, their living cost, etc., their risk of ruin, all that kind of stuff. Okay, because once you're playing under financial stress, it's really hard to perform optimally. All right. I want to thank Adam, first podcast of this year. All right. Hope many great podcasts to come. If you're interested in improving your poker career this year, if you feel like this 2023 is the year for you guys, we have reopened up the Mechanics of Poker for the first week of January. You can now apply. So go over to mechanicsofpoker.com, fill out your application, and we'll be taking on a couple of students for our program. So this could be you. Get a chance to work together with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.